When my husband of 38 years died, I thought burying him would be the hardest part of my grief. I was wrong. The hardest part was discovering that the man I'd shared my life with had been sharing his with someone else, someone who now stood in the funeral home wearing a dress tight enough to be obscene and lips painted red like she was dressing for a victory lap instead of a funeral. That moment changed everything. 3 days later, when she collapsed at the reading of the will, I realized that sometimes karma doesn't need your help. It just needs an audience. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know in the comments if you've ever had your whole life turned upside down in a single moment. Trust me when I say this story is just getting started. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. Ellie to the people who love me, and there were plenty who did. I was married to James Mitchell for nearly 4 decades, a lifetime of memories, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a house in Westfield that we bought when it was nothing but potential and a mortgage we could barely afford. James was the kind of man people respected, not because he was flashy or because he commanded attention when he walked into a room, but because he was steady, reliable. The hardware store he built from nothing became the backbone of our community. Mitchell's Hardware, "We've got what you need," was more than just a slogan on the sign that hung above his shop. It was a promise that defined him, or so I thought. The day he died wasn't dramatic. There was no car crash, no heart attack that sent him clutching at his chest while he reached for me with his other hand. No, James Mitchell died the way he lived, quietly and without fuss. He went to sleep beside me on a Tuesday night in April and simply never woke up. A brain aneurysm, they told me. It could have happened to anyone. The first 48 hours after his death were a blur of phone calls and arrangements. Our children, David, Sarah, and Michael, flew in from their respective corners of the country. David from Seattle with his wife and twins, Sarah from Chicago with her husband and 3 boys, and Michael from Boston, still single at 35 and married to his career as a corporate lawyer. They rallied around me, making coffee I didn't drink and answering calls I couldn't bear to take. Mom's in shock. I heard Sarah whisper to her brothers in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear them from where I sat in the living room, staring at James's empty recliner. "We need to take care of everything." And they did. They contacted Miller's Funeral Home, selected a casket, mahogany, with brass handles. Dad would appreciate the craftsmanship, David had said, and even wrote the obituary that would appear in the Westfield Gazette. James Mitchell, 63, beloved husband, father, grandfather, and local business owner, passed away peacefully in his sleep. The words read like they were talking about someone else, someone I didn't know. It wasn't until the evening before the visitation that I pulled myself together enough to face what needed to be done. I stood in our bedroom, staring at my closet, trying to decide what one wears to say goodbye to the man they've loved since they were 22. "I should go to the funeral home," I said to Sarah, who hovered in the doorway, watching me with worried eyes. "I need to make sure everything is right." "Michael and I can go," she offered quickly. "You should rest." I shook my head. "No. I need to do this." What I didn't tell her was that I needed to see him one more time, to confirm that he was really gone, that this wasn't some elaborate mistake or cruel joke. The funeral home was quiet when I arrived, the kind of hushed silence that makes you feel like you're trespassing even when you're invited. Frank Miller, who had buried half of Westfield over the last 30 years, met me at the door with a practiced look of sympathy. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're all set for tomorrow. Would you like to see him?" I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. Frank led me down a hallway lined with muted landscape paintings and into a room where James lay, in the casket we had chosen. He looked peaceful, dressed in his best suit, the charcoal gray one he wore to our daughter's wedding. Someone had placed his reading glasses in his breast pocket, a detail that made my throat tighten. "We'll have the flowers arranged by morning," Frank was saying, but his voice sounded far away. "The service will be at 2, followed by..." The sound of the front door opening interrupted him. Footsteps clicked across the marble floor of the foyer, confident and sharp. A woman's voice called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Frank excused himself, leaving me alone with James. I reached out and touched his hand, cold and stiff under my fingers. "Who were you?" I whispered to him. "Really?" The murmur of voices drifted in from the hallway, one of them rising with an insistence that made me turn toward the door. Through the crack, I could see Frank speaking with a woman whose back was to me. All I could make out was her silhouette, tall, slender, with dark hair cascading down her back. She wore a black dress that hugged every curve, more suitable for a cocktail party than a funeral home. "I understand your concern, Ms. Blackwood," Frank was saying, his tone professional but firm, "but the family has requested a private viewing this evening." "I'm practically family," the woman replied, her voice rich and smooth like expensive whiskey. "James would have wanted me here." "James?" The familiarity in her tone made my skin prickle. I stepped closer to the door, straining to hear. "I'm afraid I must insist," Frank continued. "The visitation is tomorrow at noon. You're welcome to pay your respects then." The woman sighed dramatically.
"Fine.
"But make sure these are placed beside him." She handed Frank something I couldn't see. "And make sure his wife doesn't remove them."
His wife."
The way she said it, like it was a technicality, an inconvenience, sent a chill through me. Frank's voice hardened. "Ms. Blackwood, I think it's best if you leave now." I heard the click of heels retreating, followed by the heavy thud of the front door closing. Frank returned to the viewing room, his expression carefully neutral, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. "Who was that?" I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer. Frank hesitated. "Just someone paying their respects, Mrs. Mitchell." "What did she give you?" He shifted uncomfortably, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "She asked that this be placed with your husband." I took the box from him, my fingers trembling. Inside was a gold pocket watch, engraved with the initials JM and VB, with a date from 3 years ago. Beneath it lay a folded note on pink stationery. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "To my dearest James, time was always on our side until it wasn't. I'll miss our stolen moments more than you'll ever know. Forever yours, Victoria." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Victoria. I had heard that name before, mentioned casually in conversations over the years. Victoria Blackwood, James had said, was a commercial real estate agent who had helped him acquire the property for his second hardware store location 5 years ago. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you all right?" Frank's voice seemed to come from underwater. "I'm fine," I lied, closing the box with a snap. "Please don't put this with my husband." Frank nodded, taking the box back. "Of course." I left the funeral home in a daze, driving home on autopilot. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer, with scenarios I didn't want to imagine. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. The note could have been innocent, a dramatic expression of friendship from a business associate with poor boundaries. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning dawned gray and rainy, as if the sky itself was in mourning. I dressed mechanically in the black dress I had bought for my mother's funeral 3 years earlier, applied minimal makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes, and twisted my silver-streaked hair into a neat bun. Sarah helped me with my pearl necklace, a gift from James on our 30th anniversary. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said, squeezing my shoulders. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, seeing not beauty, but bewilderment.
"Doi,"
I asked softly. "I feel like I don't recognize myself anymore." She misunderstood, attributing my words to grief rather than the disorientation of discovering that my life might have been built on lies. "It's normal," she assured me. "Nothing feels real right now." How right she was, though not for the reasons she thought. The visitation was scheduled to begin at noon, but we arrived at 11 to greet the funeral home staff and make any final adjustments. The main viewing room had been transformed overnight. Floral arrangements crowded every available surface, filling the air with their heavy perfume. James's casket lay at the front of the room, surrounded by easels displaying photo collages of our life together. Our wedding day, the births of our children, family vacations, holidays, and milestones. Looking at those photos now felt like studying evidence from a crime scene. Had he been living a double life in the moments between those frozen smiles? How many lies had he told me to create the time and space for Victoria Blackwood? I was arranging a bouquet of lilies, James's favorite, when I heard her again. That same confident click of heels on marble, that same smooth voice addressing the funeral director by his first name, as if they were old friends. "Frank, darling, the flowers look lovely. I told you lilies were his favorite." I stiffened, my hands freezing mid-motion. Behind me, I heard Sarah whisper to Michael, "Who is that?" I turned slowly, finally coming face to face with the woman who had shared my husband's secrets. Victoria Blackwood was everything I wasn't. Where my body had softened with age and childbearing, hers was taut and lean. Where my hair had faded to a mixture of brown and silver, hers was a glossy black that couldn't possibly be natural at her age, which I guessed to be mid-40s. Her face was beautiful in a sharp way. High cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes lined with kohl, and those blood-red lips that seemed to mock the somber occasion. She wore a black dress that clung to her body like a second skin, with a neckline that plunged daringly low and a hemline that stopped well above her knees. Around her neck gleamed a diamond pendant that caught the light every time she moved. I recognized it instantly. It had been my Christmas gift to James 2 years ago, a gift he had claimed to have lost during a business trip to Chicago. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I saw the flicker of recognition in her gaze, followed by something else. Not shame, not embarrassment, but a strange sort of triumph. She walked toward me, her stiletto heels sinking into the plush carpet. "You must be Eleanor," she said, extending a manicured hand.
I'm Victoria Blackwood.
James and I worked together. The audacity of her introduction, as if we were meeting at a dinner party rather than my husband's funeral, left me momentarily speechless. I didn't take her hand. "I know who you are," I finally managed, my voice steadier than I expected. "What I don't know is why you're wearing the necklace I gave my husband." A flash of surprise crossed her face, quickly replaced by a practiced smile. "James gave it to me," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "He had exquisite taste." Behind me, I heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath. Michael stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between this woman and me. "I think you should leave," he said, his lawyer's voice brooking no argument. Victoria's smile didn't waver. "I have as much right to be here as anyone," she replied, her eyes never leaving mine. "More than some, perhaps." "This is a private family gathering," Michael insisted. "Oh." Victoria raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "And what exactly do you think I was to your father?" The implication hung in the air between us, heavy as lead. My children looked to me, uncertainty and dawning horror in their eyes. "Mom," Sarah whispered. I squared my shoulders, finding strength in the protective presence of my children. "I'd like to speak with Miss Blackwood alone," I said quietly. "Mom, I don't think," David began, but I silenced him with a look. Just for a moment. My children exchanged worried glances, but retreated to the foyer, leaving Victoria and me standing among the flowers and photographs that chronicled a life I was beginning to think I'd imagined. "How long?" I asked once we were alone. Victoria smoothed her dress, taking her time to answer. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me," she sighed, as if my question was tedious. 5 years, if you must know, since I helped him expand the business." Her red lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He wasn't happy, Eleanor. Surely you knew that." Each word was a needle piercing my skin. 5 years. More than an affair, a relationship, a parallel life running alongside the one he shared with me. "If he was so unhappy," I said, fighting to keep my voice from shaking, "why didn't he leave?" Victoria's laugh was soft and condescending. "Oh, Eleanor. The business, the family reputation, the hassle of divorce at his age. There were so many reasons, but he would have eventually. We had plans."
Plans.
The word echoed in my head. What kind of plans had my husband made with this woman while lying beside me in bed each night? "I think you should go," I said, suddenly tired. "Whatever you had with James, it's over now." Victoria stepped closer, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume. "Is it?" she murmured. "I wonder what you'll think when the will is read. James took care of me, Eleanor. He made sure I'd be provided for." The implication was clear. James had left this woman a portion of what should have been mine, our children's inheritance, the fruits of our shared life and labor. I swallowed my pride and asked, trembling despite my best efforts, "What time will the funeral be?" It was a nonsensical question. I knew perfectly well when my husband's funeral was scheduled. But shock had scrambled my thoughts, and it was the only thing I could think to say that wouldn't reveal how thoroughly she had shaken me. Victoria looked me in the eye, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "He's long gone," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Now all his money is mine." The room tilted, the ground shifted beneath my feet, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply turned on my heel and walked away, back to my children who were watching with concerned faces from the doorway. "Mom," David reached for me as I approached. "What did she say to you?" I couldn't answer him. Not then. Not with Victoria's words ringing in my ears and the weight of James's betrayal crushing my chest. I walked past my children, past Frank Miller's apologetic expression, and out into the parking lot where rain was falling in sheets. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and let the tears come at last. They weren't tears of sadness. At least, not entirely. They were tears of rage, of humiliation, of 38 years of memories now tainted by the knowledge that they had been built on deception. A tap on the window startled me. Michael stood in the rain, his suit already soaked. I unlocked the door, and he slid into the passenger seat. "Who is she?" he asked simply. I wiped at my eyes. "Your father's mistress, apparently." Michael was quiet for a long moment, raindrops tracking down his face like tears. "For how long?"
5 years, she says.
He swore under his breath, something I'd never heard him do. "What does she want?" I laughed, a harsh sound that hurt my throat.
"Money."
"What else?" "She seems to think your father left her everything." "That's ridiculous," Michael said firmly. "Dad would never do that. But would he?" The James the First thought I knew wouldn't have cheated on his wife of nearly 4 decades. The James the First thought I knew wouldn't have given another woman the jewelry he claimed to have lost. Who was to say what this stranger was capable of? "We should go back inside," I said finally. "People will be arriving soon." Michael hesitated. "Are you sure you're up to this?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I nodded anyway. "I need to say goodbye to your father, whatever kind of man he turned out to be." The next few hours passed in a surreal haze. Friends, neighbors, employees from the hardware stores, and what seemed like half of Westfield filed through the viewing room, offering condolences and sharing stories about James that now rang hollow in my ears. I stood beside his casket, accepting hugs and handshakes, playing the role of grieving widow while scanning each new arrival for Victoria's sleek black dress and blood-red lips. She didn't reappear, but her presence lingered like a shadow in my peripheral vision. Every time the door opened, I tensed, preparing myself for another confrontation. But it wasn't until the very end of the visitation, when most people had already left, that I discovered the true extent of her boldness. As the funeral home staff began to clear away empty water glasses and rearrange chairs for the next day's service, I approached James's casket for one final moment alone with him. It was then that I noticed something tucked into his breast pocket alongside his reading glasses, a small white envelope. I glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully removed it. Inside was a hotel key card and a note written in the same flowing script as the one that had accompanied the pocket watch. "My dearest Jay, room 212 at the Westfield Inn. Our special place. I've made sure they'll keep our standing reservation, just as you asked. Tuesday afternoons will never be the same without you. All my love, V." Tuesday afternoons. Every Tuesday for the past 5 years, James had claimed to be meeting with suppliers or conducting inventory at the second store location. I had never questioned it. Why would I? Trust had been the foundation of our marriage. Or so I had believed. I slipped the key card and note into my purse, a strange calm settling over me. Later, I would allow myself to feel the full force of this betrayal. Later, I would scream or cry or break something valuable. But in that moment, a different emotion took precedence. Curiosity. What else had James hidden from me? What other secrets would I uncover now that he wasn't here to guard them? The funeral the next day was well attended. The church filled to capacity with people whose connections to James ranged from lifelong friendships to casual business acquaintances. I sat in the front pew with our children and grandchildren, staring at the flower-draped casket while Reverend Thompson spoke about James's dedication to his family and community. James Mitchell was a man who understood the value of commitment, the Reverend said, his voice resonating through the church. His devotion to his wife, Eleanor, was an example to us all. Beside me, Sarah squeezed my hand, mistaking my soft, involuntary laugh for a sob. I squeezed back, grateful for her support even as I marveled at the irony of the Reverend's words. Victoria sat 3 rows behind us, I knew without turning to look. I could feel her eyes boring into the back of my head throughout the service. Once, when Michael delivered a moving eulogy about his father's integrity, I heard a sound that might have been a scoff from her direction. After the burial, we hosted a reception at our home. The home James and I had shared for 35 years, the home where we had raised our children and celebrated countless milestones. As friends and family filled our living room and spilled out onto the back patio, I found myself observing them with new eyes. Who else had known about Victoria? Who had kept James a secret, perhaps out of misguided loyalty or fear of hurting me? Mrs. Mitchell. The voice came from behind me as I refilled a tray of sandwiches in the kitchen. I turned to find Harold Jenkins, James's accountant for the past 2 decades, standing in the doorway. Harold, I acknowledged, forcing a smile. Thank you for coming. He twisted his hands nervously in front of him. I wanted to express my condolences, of course, but also, there's something we should discuss. About James's estate. I set down the sandwich tray. Is there a problem? Harold glanced over his shoulder, then stepped further into the kitchen, lowering his voice. I'm not sure. There have been some unusual financial movements over the past few years. Withdrawals and transfers that I can't fully account for. My heart quickened. What kind of withdrawals? Large ones, Harold said, looking uncomfortable. And frequent. Always in cash. Cash that couldn't be traced. Cash that could easily be handed to someone like Victoria Blackwood. How much? I asked. Harold hesitated. In total, close to $500,000. The kitchen seemed to spin around me. $500,000.
Gone.
Siphoned from our accounts to fund whatever life James had been building with Victoria. There's more, Harold continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. 2 years ago, James changed his will.
Of course he had.
Victoria's smug confidence made sense now. When is the reading? I asked, surprised by how calm I sounded. Monday morning, 10 a.m., at Lowell and Associates. Harold paused, then added, Eleanor, I don't know what's in the will. James insisted on using a different law firm for his personal affairs. But given the financial activity I've observed, you might want to prepare yourself. Prepare myself. As if anything could prepare me for the public humiliation of learning that my husband had left his fortune to his mistress. Thank you for telling me, Harold, I said, picking up the sandwich tray again. If you'll excuse me, my guests are waiting. I moved through the rest of the reception on autopilot, accepting condolences and deflecting concerned questions about my argument with the woman at the funeral home. Word had spread quickly in our small town, as it always did. By evening, when the last guests had departed and my children were cleaning up the kitchen, I was exhausted beyond measure. Mom, you should rest, Sarah insisted, taking a stack of plates from my hands. We've got this. I nodded, too tired to argue. I think I'll lie down for a bit. But once in my bedroom, our bedroom, sleep was impossible. The space felt both empty and crowded at the same time, haunted by James's absence and the newly discovered presence of his deception. I opened his closet, running my fingers over the neatly hung suits and pressed shirts. Everything in its place, just as he had always insisted. James had been meticulous about his belongings, orderly to the point of compulsion. It was one of his traits I had found endearing, if occasionally frustrating. Now, that meticulousness took on a sinister quality. What else had he organized, cataloged, hidden away? What evidence of his betrayal might be lurking in our home? I began to search methodically, starting with his dresser drawers. Nothing unusual among the socks and underwear, the carefully folded sweaters. His nightstand contained only reading glasses, breath mints, and a well-worn paperback thriller. The closet yielded nothing at first glance, just clothing and shoes, arranged by color and style. But as I ran my hands along the top shelf, my fingers brushed against something taped to the underside, a small key. Heart racing, I continued my search with renewed purpose. In his home office, I examined every drawer, every book on the shelves, every folder in the filing cabinet. Nothing seemed out of place or suspicious. It wasn't until I looked under his desk that I found it, a small safe, bolted to the floor and hidden beneath a decorative panel that I had always assumed was part of the desk's construction. The key fit perfectly. Inside the safe was a manila envelope containing several items, a second cell phone I had never seen before, a small leather notebook, and a USB drive. My hands trembled as I removed them, laying each item on the desk like pieces of evidence at a crime scene. The phone was password protected, but the four-digit code wasn't hard to guess. 0527, Victoria's birthday, according to the numerous calendar entries in the leather notebook. May 27th. Just 3 weeks away. James had missed her birthday by less than a month. The notebook was filled with James's handwriting, detailing meetings with Victoria, gifts he had purchased for her, plans they had made together. There were references to trips I had known nothing about, weekends when he had claimed to be at hardware supplier conventions, but had actually been with her in Chicago, New York, even once in Paris.
Paris.
We had always talked about going to Paris together. It had been a dream of mine since college, a dream James had always deferred with practical concerns about cost and timing. Someday, he had promised. Someday had come for Victoria instead. The USB drive contained photographs, hundreds of them, documenting James and Victoria's relationship over the years. Dinners at restaurants I had never been to, walks along Lake Michigan, cozy evenings in what appeared to be her apartment. In every photo, James looked happier than I had seen him in years, his smile wider, his eyes brighter. There were financial documents as well, records of transfers to an account in Victoria's name, receipts for jewelry and designer clothing, even a deed to a condominium in Chicago that James had apparently purchased 2 years ago. My head throbbed as I scrolled through the evidence of my husband's double life. How had I been so blind? How had I failed to notice that the man I slept beside each night was a stranger? A soft knock at the door startled me. I quickly closed the laptop and slipped the phone and notebook back into the safe, locking it and replacing the panel. "Come in," I called, trying to sound normal. Michael opened the door, his expression concerned. "You've been in here for hours. Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Just going through some of your father's things." He nodded, understanding. "We were thinking of ordering pizza for dinner. Does that sound all right?" "Perfect," I said, though the thought of food made my stomach churn. "I'll be down shortly." After he left, I returned the key to its hiding place on the closet shelf. I would need time to process what I had discovered, to decide what to do with this knowledge. For now, I would keep it to myself. There was no need to burden my children with the full extent of their father's betrayal. Not yet, anyway. The weekend passed in a blur of administrative tasks related to James's death, notifying insurance companies, canceling credit cards, sorting through the condolence cards that continued to arrive daily. My children stayed close, taking turns sleeping on the pull-out sofa in the living room, as if they feared I might collapse without supervision. I played my part well, accepting their concern with appropriate gratitude, allowing them to believe that my subdued demeanor was simply grief. In reality, I was numb, my emotions frozen in a state of suspended animation as I tried to reconcile the James the First had loved with the man who had systematically deceived me for years. On Sunday evening, the day before the will reading, I found myself alone for the first time since the funeral. David had taken his family to visit his in-laws. Sarah and her husband had gone to pick up Michael from the airport. He had flown back to Boston briefly to handle some urgent work matters, and I had the house to myself for a precious few hours. I retrieved the key from the closet and returned to James's office, this time with a clearer purpose. I wanted to know exactly what I would be facing the next morning at the law office. Had James truly left everything to Victoria, as she had implied? Had he planned to destroy not only my heart but my financial security as well? The notebook provided some clues, with entries referring to meetings with attorneys and revisions to his will. But it was the cell phone that held the most revealing information. After scrolling through hundreds of text messages between James and Victoria, messages that made me alternately blush and seethe with anger, I found what I was looking for, a conversation from just 3 months ago. Victoria, did you take care of it? James, it's done. Changed the will today. Victoria, everything we discussed? James, yes. You'll be taken care of, I promise. Victoria, what about her? James, Eleanor will get what she deserves. What I deserved. After 38 years of marriage, 3 children, and countless sacrifices, what exactly did James think I deserved? Further messages suggested that James had been considering divorce, prompted by Victoria's increasing impatience with their arrangement. But something had held him back, concern about his reputation in the community, perhaps, or reluctance to divide his assets. Whatever his reasons, death had made the decision for him. I replaced everything in the safe, my mind racing. Tomorrow, I would face not only the legal reality of James's betrayal, but the public humiliation of it as well. Victoria would be there, I was certain, ready to claim her prize while I watched my life's security crumble. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, mentally preparing myself for what was to come. By morning, a strange calm had settled over me. Whatever James had done, whatever provision he had made for his mistress, I would face it with dignity. I would not give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing me break. Monday dawned bright and clear, a beautiful spring day that seemed to mock the turmoil within me. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit, professional, dignified, nothing like the grief-stricken widow Victoria might expect. Are you sure you don't want us to come with you? Sarah asked as I prepared to leave for the law office. I shook my head. This is something I need to do alone. I didn't add that I wanted to spare them the potential embarrassment of witnessing their father's final betrayal. The offices of Lowell and Associates occupied the top floor of the tallest building in Westfield, 6 stories of glass and steel that passed for a skyscraper in our modest town. I arrived 10 minutes early, taking the elevator to the 6th floor with my heart hammering in my chest. The receptionist, a young woman with a sympathetic smile, led me to a conference room where a small group was already gathered. Harold Jenkins nodded to me from one side of the long table. Across from him sat Richard Lowell, a silver-haired attorney who had been James's golf partner for the past decade. And there, at the far end of the table, sat Victoria Blackwood. She wore a black suit today, tailored to emphasize her slender figure, with a cream silk blouse that dipped low enough to reveal the diamond pendant, my diamond pendant, still hanging around her neck. Her lips were the same vivid red, her smile just as confident as it had been at the funeral home. Eleanor, she greeted me, as if we were old friends meeting for lunch. How lovely to see you again. I didn't respond, taking a seat as far from her as possible. Richard cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the obvious tension in the room. Well, now that we're all here, we can begin, he said, opening a folder in front of him. We're gathered today for the reading of the last will and testament of James Edward Mitchell. I braced myself, hands folded tightly in my lap, as Richard began to read the formal legal language of the will. My mind drifted in and out, catching phrases like being of sound mind and body, and hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her posture expectant, like a cat about to pounce on a helpless bird. I forced myself to look away from her, focusing instead on the framed landscape painting on the wall behind Richard's head. Regarding the distribution of my assets, Richard continued, his voice bringing my attention back to the matter at hand. To my wife, Eleanor Grace Mitchell, I leave the following. Our primary residence at 1423 Maple Street, Westfield, along with all its contents, my life insurance policy in the amount of $2 million, all bank accounts and investment portfolios held jointly in our names, and 51% ownership of Mitchell's Hardware Incorporated. I blinked, certain I had misheard. This didn't sound like a man who had planned to leave his wife destitute while enriching his mistress. Victoria's smile had begun to falter, her perfectly manicured nails now tapping impatiently on the polished surface of the conference table. To my children, David James Mitchell, Sarah Mitchell Cooper, and Michael Thomas Mitchell, I leave the remaining 49% of Mitchell's Hardware Incorporated, to be divided equally among them, along with my collection of rare coins and first edition books, to be divided as they see fit. Victoria's tapping grew more insistent, her smile completely gone now. Richard continued, seemingly oblivious to her growing agitation. To my loyal employees, I leave a bonus of 1 month's salary for each year of service, to be paid from my business accounts. He turned the page, and I held my breath. Here it was, the provision for Victoria, the acknowledgement of their relationship, the portion of his estate that he had set aside for her. Finally, Richard said, regarding any person who might claim entitlement to a portion of my estate based on an extramarital relationship, I hereby state that any such claim is invalid and without merit. Furthermore, I have instructed my attorneys to vigorously contest any such claim, using all available evidence, including but not limited to personal correspondence, financial records, and photographic documentation. The room went completely silent. Victoria's face had drained of color, her red lips standing out starkly against her suddenly pale skin. This concludes the formal reading of the will, Richard said, closing the folder. Are there any questions? Victoria shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is impossible, she hissed. James promised me. We had an agreement. Richard regarded her coolly. I'm afraid Mr. Mitchell's will is quite clear, Miss Blackwood. Clear? She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. There's nothing clear about this. James told me he changed his will. He said I would be taken care of. And so you were, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. Just not in the way you expected. Victoria's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt with steady hands. James did change his will 3 months ago. He added that final clause, the one that specifically excludes you. You're lying, she spat, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. I found his phone. I continued, keeping my tone even. I read your messages. When you asked if he had taken care of it, he wasn't talking about providing for you. He was protecting me and our children from you. Victoria's face contorted with rage.
No.
No, that's not possible. James loved me. He was going to leave you. Perhaps, I conceded, surprised by my own calm in the face of her fury. But he died before he could. And in the end, it seems he chose his family over his, whatever you were to him. She lunged forward suddenly, her hand connecting with my cheek in a stinging slap that echoed through the conference room. Harold gasped. Richard half rose from his chair, calling for his secretary to summon security. I didn't flinch, didn't raise my hand to my burning cheek. I simply looked at Victoria, seeing her clearly for what she was, not a temptress or a homewrecker, but a desperate woman who had bet on the wrong man. He used you, I said softly. Just as he used me. The difference is I got 38 years and 3 beautiful children. What did you get, Victoria? A handful of Tuesday afternoons and an empty promise? Something in my words struck home. Victoria staggered back, her hand flying to her throat, clutching at the diamond pendant as if it were a lifeline. Her eyes rolled back, her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor in a dead faint. The room erupted into action, Richard calling for his secretary to dial 911, Harold kneeling beside Victoria's prone form to check her pulse. I stood still amid the chaos, a strange sense of vindication washing over me. James had betrayed me, yes. He had lied and cheated and made a mockery of our vows. But in the end, he had protected what we had built together. Whether out of guilt, love, or simple practicality, he had chosen to secure my future rather than hers. As paramedics arrived to attend to Victoria, I gathered my purse and prepared to leave. Richard touched my arm gently. Eleanor, are you all right? That was quite a scene. I nodded, offering him a small smile. I'm better than I've been in days, actually. Thank you for your assistance. Outside, the spring sunshine felt warmer than it had that morning. I took a deep breath, feeling as if I were awakening from a long, troubled sleep. The nightmare wasn't over. There would be months of adjustment ahead, of learning to live alone, of rebuilding my understanding of the past 4 decades. But for now, at least, I had won a small victory. My phone rang as I reached my car. It was Sarah, eager for news. How did it go? She asked anxiously. Your father took care of us, I told her, sliding behind the wheel. Everything is going to be fine. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. There would be time later to decide how much to tell my children about their father's double life, about the Victoria Blackwoods of the world who prey on married men with wandering eyes. For now, I would go home. My home, secured by the will of a man I had loved and lost in more ways than one. I would change into comfortable clothes, pour myself a glass of wine, and begin the process of figuring out who Eleanor Mitchell was when she wasn't James Mitchell's wife. The front door was unlocked when I arrived home, which was strange. I was certain I had locked it before leaving. Cautiously, I pushed it open, calling out, "Hello? Sarah? Michael?" No response. The house was silent, the late morning sunlight streaming through the windows and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I set my purse on the entry table and moved further inside, a sense of unease growing with each step. In the living room, everything appeared normal at first glance. Then I noticed it, a single red rose laid across the coffee table, its stem stripped of thorns, its petals fully bloomed and vibrant against the dark wood. Beside it was a note, written in a flowing script I recognized immediately. This isn't over, Eleanor. You may have won the money, but you've lost everything else. How does it feel to know he never really loved you? That every time he touched you, he was thinking of me? That when he closed his eyes at night, it was my face he saw, not yours. James may be gone, but I'm still here, and I have nothing left to lose. Sweet dreams, Victoria. I sank onto the sofa, the note trembling in my fingers. The victory I had felt leaving the law office evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. Victoria Blackwood had fainted at the reading of the will, but apparently, she had recovered quickly enough to break into my home and leave this threatening message. What else might she be capable of in her rage and disappointment? I reached for my phone to call the police, then hesitated. What crime could I report? She hadn't stolen anything or damaged any property. A trespassing charge would be minor, a slap on the wrist at best. And filing a report would mean explaining to the officers, and eventually to the entire town, the sordid details of James's affair. No, this was a battle I would need to fight on my own terms. Victoria wanted to intimidate me, to keep me off balance and afraid. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I picked up the rose, its sweet scent now seeming cloying and sinister, and carried it to the kitchen. With deliberate movements, I dropped it into the garbage disposal and flipped the switch, listening with grim satisfaction as the blades reduced it to pulp. The note followed, torn into tiny pieces, and flushed down the toilet. Then I methodically checked every door and window in the house, securing each lock, drawing the blinds against prying eyes. Only when I was certain the house was secure did I allow myself to consider the implications of Victoria's threat. She was dangerous, not in the way of fictional villains with weapons or supernatural powers, but in the way of a woman with nothing to lose and a desperate need for revenge. I picked up my phone again, this time dialing Harold Jenkins's number. Eleanor, he answered on the second ring. I was just about to call you. That was quite a scene at the reading. Harold, I said, keeping my voice steady. I need to know everything about Victoria Blackwood. Where she lives, where she works, her financial situation, everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. May I ask why? Because she was in my house when I got home. She left me a threatening note. Harold's sharp intake of breath told me he understood the seriousness of the situation. I'll see what I can find out. In the meantime, perhaps you should stay with one of your children. No, I said firmly. This is my home. I won't be driven from it by James's mistress or anyone else. After hanging up, I poured myself that glass of wine I had promised myself earlier and sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. How much did Victoria know about me, about my routines and habits? How far would she go to exact her revenge for what she perceived as my stealing of her inheritance? And more importantly, what was I prepared to do to protect myself and my family from her? As the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the floor, I made a decision. Victoria Blackwood had declared war, and I, Eleanor Mitchell, widow, mother, and apparently a more formidable opponent than either of us had realized, would not surrender without a fight. The game had only just begun.
I didn't sleep that night.
Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows had me sitting bolt upright, straining to hear if Victoria had returned. By morning, my eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but my mind was sharp with purpose. If Victoria wanted war, I would give her one, but on my terms, not hers. If you've ever had someone try to intimidate you in your own home, drop a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to know what happens next. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. By 9 o'clock, every lock in the house had been changed, and a new security system was being installed. The technician, a young man with kind eyes and efficient hands, didn't ask questions when I requested motion sensors for every entrance and window. Just being cautious, I told him when he suggested that the comprehensive system might be more than a woman living alone in Westfield would need. My husband recently passed away. That was all it took, the magic words that explained everything without explaining anything at all. The young man nodded solemnly, then proceeded to install enough security to protect Fort Knox. As he worked, I made another call, this one to Michael. Of my 3 children, he was the most pragmatic, the least likely to overreact to what I was about to tell him. "Mom," he answered, the background noise suggesting he was already at the office despite the early hour. "Everything okay?" "I need to talk to you," I said, keeping my voice low as I moved to the backyard, out of earshot of the locksmith. "About Victoria Blackwood." The silence on the other end told me he was finding somewhere private to continue our conversation. A moment later, the background noise disappeared. "What about her?" I took a deep breath. "She was in our house yesterday. She left a threatening note." Michael's response was immediate and predictable. "I'm calling the police." "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. I need information first." "Information?" "Mom, she broke into your house. What more do you need to know?" I paced across the dewy grass, gathering my thoughts. "I need to know what we're dealing with. Who she really is, what her connection to your father was beyond the obvious. And how do you propose we find that out?" "You're a lawyer," I reminded him. "You must have resources, ways of investigating people." Another silence, longer this time. When Michael spoke again, his voice had a cautious edge. "Mom, what exactly are you planning?" It was a fair question. What was I planning? Revenge? Justice? Or simply protection for myself and my family? "I just want to be prepared," I said finally. "Victoria seems unstable. That scene at the will reading, and now this. I need to know what she might do next." Michael sighed, the sound of a man who knew he was being drawn into something complicated. "I'll see what I can find out, but promise me you won't do anything rash." I almost laughed. Rash. I had been the steady one, the reliable one, the one who never acted without careful consideration for nearly 4 decades. Even now, with my world shattered and a potential threat lurking outside my door, my approach was methodical. "I promise," I assured him. "Just information for now." After we hung up, I returned to the house to find the locksmith finishing up. He handed me a set of new keys and a small remote for the security system, walking me through the operation with patient detail. "The code is set to 7294, he explained. "You can change it to something you'll remember easily." I nodded, already knowing what code I would use. After he left, I reprogrammed the system to 0527, Victoria's birthday. The same code James had used on his secret phone. Know your enemy, as they say. Harold Jenkins called just as I was making myself a late breakfast, if coffee and toast could be called breakfast. Eleanor, he began without preamble, I've found some information about Miss Blackwood that you should know. I sat at the kitchen table, pen poised over a notepad. Go ahead. She's worked as a real estate agent with Westfield Properties for 6 years. Before that, she was at a firm in Chicago. Her credit report shows substantial debt, credit cards mostly, and a mortgage on a condo that seems beyond her means based on her reported income. I made notes as he spoke, a picture forming in my mind of a woman living beyond her means, perhaps sustained by my husband's generosity. Anything else? Harold hesitated. This is where it gets concerning. She has a history, Eleanor. 2 restraining orders filed against her by former boyfriends, both claiming harassment and threatening behavior after their relationships ended. A chill ran through me. So, this isn't the first time she's fixated on someone. Apparently not. And there's more. I did some digging into those unexplained withdrawals from James's accounts. Many of them correspond with payments to Victoria's credit cards and mortgage. The pieces were falling into place. James hadn't just been having an affair. He had been financially supporting Victoria, paying for a lifestyle she couldn't afford on her own. And now that support had been cut off, not gradually but suddenly and completely. What about her current financial situation? I asked. Precarious, to put it mildly. Her last commission was 3 months ago. Without James's contributions, she's likely to default on her mortgage within weeks. A desperate woman with a history of unstable behavior, facing financial ruin. The threat level had just increased significantly. Thank you, Harold, I said, my pen still moving across the notepad. This is very helpful. Eleanor, he said, his voice gentle but concerned, please be careful. Perhaps you should consider staying with family until this situation resolves itself. It was the second time someone had suggested I leave my home, as if Victoria Blackwood had more right to Westfield than I did. This is my home, Harold. I won't be driven from it. After we hung up, I studied my notes, trying to formulate a plan. Victoria clearly needed money she had expected to get from James's estate. Without it, she was facing ruin. That gave her motive, but it also gave me leverage. My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. The new security system chimed, and a video feed on my phone showed Sarah standing on the porch, a shopping bag in hand. I let her in, forcing a smile that I hoped appeared more genuine than it felt. I brought lunch, she announced, holding up the bag. And I thought maybe we could go through some of Dad's things. Start the sorting process. The idea of going through James's belongings with Sarah, when there was still so much she didn't know about her father, made my stomach clench. But refusing would only raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer. That's thoughtful, I said, taking the bag from her. Let me just put this in the kitchen, and we can get started. Sarah followed me, her eyes widening at the sight of the new security panel on the wall. Mom, what is that? I busied myself unpacking the sandwiches she had brought. Just a security system. It seemed like a good idea, now that I'm living alone. She frowned, unconvinced. Since when have you been worried about security in Westfield? This isn't exactly Chicago. Things change, I said simply. After your father, I just feel better with it, that's all. Sarah studied me with the penetrating gaze she had inherited from James, the one that always made me feel like she could see right through any pretense. This is about that woman, isn't it? The one from the funeral home. I considered deflecting, but lying to my daughter felt like a betrayal on top of the ones James had already committed. Yes, I admitted. Her name is Victoria Blackwood, and she was involved with your father. Sarah's face tightened, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Involved how? They were having an affair, I said, the words still bitter on my tongue despite how many times I had repeated them in my mind. For 5 years, apparently. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, processing this confirmation of what she had likely suspected since the scene at the funeral home. When she opened them again, they were bright with tears. Why are you afraid of her? Did she threaten you? I hesitated, balancing my desire to protect my daughter from the ugliness of the situation against her right to know what was happening. She's upset about the will. Your father didn't leave her anything, and she expected more. So she's what? Harassing you about money? It was a simplification, but not entirely inaccurate. Something like that. Sarah's expression hardened in a way I had rarely seen. We should call the police. Not yet, I said, echoing what I had told Michael. First, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. She crossed her arms, looking so much like James in that moment that it made my heart ache. And how do you plan to do that? I told her about the information Harold had provided, about Victoria's financial troubles and history of unstable behavior. As I spoke, Sarah's expression shifted from anger to concern. Mom, this woman sounds dangerous. You can't stay here alone. I'm not alone, I countered. I have the security system, and I have you and your brothers nearby. I'll be fine. Sarah looked unconvinced, but didn't press the issue. Instead, she picked up one of the sandwiches, though she made no move to eat it. So what's the plan? Just wait and see what she does next. For now, I said, not sharing the half-formed ideas that had been taking shape in my mind. Let's focus on going through your father's things, like you suggested. We spent the afternoon in James's office, sorting papers and personal items. I was careful to guide Sarah away from the hidden safe and the evidence it contained. Instead, we focused on the visible traces of James's life. Photographs, awards from the Chamber of Commerce, the collection of antique fishing lures he had inherited from his father. As we worked, Sarah shared memories of James, camping trips when she was a child, the way he had taught her to change a tire when she got her first car, the speech he had given at her wedding that had left everyone in tears. I let her talk, knowing she needed to preserve the good memories of her father, even as I struggled to reconcile them with the man who had led a double life for years. It was nearly 5 when Sarah left, promising to return the next day with boxes for the items we had decided to keep. I locked the door behind her, setting the security system with a sense of relief at being alone again. The house felt emptier than usual, haunted not just by James's absence, but by the ghost of who I had thought he was. I wandered from room to room, seeing our life together through new eyes. The wedding portrait above the fireplace, the vacation photos on the bookshelf, the quilt we had bought on our 20th anniversary trip to Vermont. All of it now seemed like props in an elaborate play where I had been the only one who didn't know the script. As twilight settled over the house, I found myself drawn back to James's office and the safe hidden beneath his desk. The phone, the notebook, the USB drive, they contained the truth, or at least James's version of it. But there was still Victoria's side of the story, the parts one couldn't see from the evidence James had left behind. What had she meant to him, really? Had he loved her, as she claimed? Had he truly planned to leave me for her, only to be prevented by his untimely death? I needed answers that couldn't be found in the safe or in Harold's financial investigations. I needed to understand the relationship that had nearly destroyed my life. The hotel key card was still in my purse, where I had placed it after finding it in James's pocket at the funeral home. Room 212 at the Westfield Inn, our special place. Victoria had called it in her note. The place where James had spent his Tuesday afternoons for the past 5 years. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my purse and car keys. The security system chimed as I left the house, a sound that offered little comfort as I drove through the darkening streets of Westfield toward the hotel on the edge of town. The Westfield Inn was one of the nicer establishments in our small town. Not luxury by any means, but clean and respectable, the kind of place where business travelers stayed when passing through. I parked in the back of the lot, away from the main entrance, and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. What was I hoping to find? Victoria herself, perhaps? Some clue to her next move? Or just a better understanding of the secret life my husband had led? The lobby was quiet when I entered, just a young woman at the front desk who barely looked up from her computer as I walked past. The elevator hummed softly as it carried me to the second floor, where I followed the signs to room 212. I stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, the key card cold in my palm. This was it, the final threshold between the life I had known and the truth I was still discovering. With a deep breath, I slid the card into the lock. The light turned green, and the door opened with a soft click. The room was dark, but I could make out the shapes of standard hotel furniture, a king-sized bed, a desk, a television mounted on the wall. I fumbled for the light switch, my heart pounding in my ears. Light flooded the room, revealing what I had both expected and dreaded, evidence that the room was still in use. A silk robe hung on the bathroom door. A bottle of expensive perfume sat on the dresser. A pair of high-heeled shoes had been kicked off beside the bed. Victoria was still coming here, maintaining the ritual even after James's death. I moved through the room slowly, taking in the details. The bed was made, but there were indentations in the pillows, as if someone had been lying on top of the covers. On the nightstand lay a framed photograph of James and Victoria, their faces close together, smiling at the camera. They looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy, in a way that made my chest ache. Beside the photograph was a leather-bound journal, similar to the one I had found in James's safe, but clearly belonging to Victoria. I hesitated only briefly before picking it up. If she had invaded my home, I had no qualms about invading her private space. The journal was filled with entries dating back 5 years, chronicling the relationship from its beginning to the present. I skimmed through it, catching glimpses of passion, arguments, reconciliations, and plans for a future together. April 15th, 2020. Jay says he's going to leave her after the holidays. Says he needs time to figure out how to do it without destroying the business reputation. I told him I don't care about any of that. I just want us to be together openly. He promised by next spring we'll be living together in Chicago. February 3rd, 2021. Another delay. Now he says he needs to wait until his youngest son finishes law school. It would devastate Michael if I left now, he claimed. I'm starting to wonder if he'll ever find the courage to leave her. October 12th, 2022. We fought again about the divorce. He says it's complicated, that there are financial considerations, that she's entitled to half of everything after so many years. I told him I don't care about the money. I just want him. But that's not entirely true, is it? I do care about the security he provides. I do care about the lifestyle we could have together if he would just make the break. The entries continued, growing increasingly frustrated and bitter as promises were made and broken, as plans were postponed again and again. The last entry was dated just 2 days after James's death. April 18th, 2025. He's gone. Just like that, all our plans, all our dreams gone. The funeral is tomorrow. I'll be there, of course. She can't keep me away. And then the will reading on Monday. Jay promised he'd take care of me. He said he'd changed his will, that I would have security even if the worst happened. Well, the worst has happened, Jay. You better have kept your promise. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. Victoria had truly believed that James intended to leave me, that he had only been waiting for the right moment. She had believed that he had provided for her in his will. And both beliefs had been shattered in the span of a few days. No wonder she was unraveling. As I replaced the journal on the nightstand, something else caught my eye. A manila envelope tucked partially under the bed. I knelt to retrieve it, surprised by its weight. Inside were stacks of photographs, letters, and what appeared to be legal documents. The photographs were similar to those I had found on the USB drive in James's safe, images of him and Victoria together in various locations. But these included something the others hadn't. Pictures of me shopping at the grocery store, me working in the garden, me having lunch with friends at the local cafe. In some, I had been circled in red marker with notes scribbled in the margins. The obstacle, the problem, the wife. A chill ran down my spine. Victoria hadn't just been having an affair with my husband. She had been studying me, cataloging my routines, perhaps even following me. The level of obsession was disturbing. The legal documents were even more alarming, printouts of articles about contesting wills, challenging estate distributions, and proving common-law marriages in various states. Victoria had been researching ways to claim a portion of James's estate, despite the explicit exclusion in his will. One particular document stood out, a draft of what appeared to be a lawsuit naming me as a defendant, alleging that I had exerted undue influence over James in his final months, causing him to change his will against his true wishes. It was unsigned and undated, but the intention was clear. Victoria was preparing for legal warfare. I was so absorbed in the documents that I didn't hear the key card in the lock. It wasn't until the door began to open that I realized I wasn't alone. I froze, the papers still in my hands, as Victoria Blackwood stepped into the room. She was dressed in business attire, a sharp blazer and pencil skirt, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a takeout coffee cup in the other. For a moment, neither of us moved or spoke. Victoria's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with cold fury as she took in the scene, me kneeling beside the bed, her private documents spread around me. "Well," she said finally, her voice dangerously soft as she set down her coffee and briefcase. "If it isn't Eleanor Mitchell, making herself at home, I see." I stood slowly, the papers clutched against my chest like a shield.
Victoria.
"How did you get in here?" she demanded, though her gaze flickered to the nightstand where James's photograph sat, answering her own question. The key card. Of course. James always was careless with important things. I said nothing, calculating my options. Victoria blocked the only exit, and though I had several inches and probably 20 pounds on her, she was younger and likely faster. And there was a wildness in her eyes that made me wary of any sudden movements. "You know," she continued, taking a step forward, "I've been wanting a private conversation with you. Away from lawyers and funeral directors and your precious children. Just you and me, the wife and the mistress. How very civilized. There's nothing civilized about breaking into someone's home and leaving threatening notes," I countered, finding my voice at last. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound that held no humor. "Says the woman I just caught going through my personal belongings." She had a point, though I wasn't about to concede it. I needed to understand what I'm dealing with. "And what have you concluded?" She moved further into the room, forcing me to step back until I felt the edge of the bed against my legs. "That I'm just some gold-digging whore who seduced your husband for his money? Is that what you think, Eleanor?" The venom in her voice made me flinch, but I held my ground. "I think you're a woman who believed James's promises. A woman who's now facing the reality that those promises were empty." Something flickered in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. "He wasn't lying," she insisted. "He loved me. He was going to leave you. We had plans." "I know," I said, softening my tone. "I read your journal. I saw the photographs. I believe that you believed him." Victoria seemed taken aback by my response, as if she had expected denial or accusations rather than understanding. "Then you know why I can't just walk away. Why I won't." I nodded slowly. "You spent 5 years waiting for a future with James. Now he's gone, and that future died with him. You're angry. You're hurt. You want someone to pay for what you've lost." "How very insightful," she sneered, but I could see that my words had hit their mark. "And do you know what else I lost, Eleanor? Every penny I had. The condo, the car, the credit cards, all of it tied to James. All of it gone now, thanks to that vindictive clause in his will." It was my turn to be surprised. "What do you mean?" Victoria's laugh was harsh. "Oh, he didn't just exclude me from inheriting. He made sure that if I tried to contest the will, his estate would immediately call in all the debts. The mortgage he co-signed, the car loan, the credit lines, all of it due immediately. James had been even more thorough than I had realized. He hadn't just protected me from Victoria's claims. He had created a financial trap that would spring if she tried to fight the will." "I didn't know," I said honestly. "Of course you didn't." Victoria moved to the dresser, picking up the perfume bottle and turning it in her hands. Saint Eleanor, the devoted wife who knew nothing of her husband's double life. "Tell me, did you really never suspect? In 5 years, you never once questioned where he was every Tuesday afternoon? Never wondered about the business trips that seemed to multiply year after year?" The question stung, carrying with it an implication of willful ignorance or, worse, complicity in my own deception. "I trusted him," I said simply. "That was my mistake." "No," Victoria replied, setting down the perfume with deliberate care. "Your mistake was coming here. Did you think you'd find some evidence to use against me? Something to take to the police, perhaps. I glanced at the documents in my hands, the photographs of me, the drafted lawsuit, the research on challenging wills. I think I've found plenty. Put those down, she ordered, her voice sharp. They don't belong to you. Neither did my husband, I retorted, but that didn't stop you from taking him. Her eyes flashed dangerously. I didn't take anything that wasn't freely given. James came to me. He chose me. Every Tuesday, every weekend away, every late night at the office, he was choosing me over you. Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed at the most vulnerable parts of my heart. But I refused to show her how deeply they cut. And yet, when it mattered most, when he was making decisions about his legacy, about who would benefit from his life's work, he chose me. He chose our children. He chose the family you could never give him. Victoria moved so quickly, I barely had time to react. One moment she was standing by the dresser. The next she was inches from me, her hand striking out to slap my face with enough force to make my head snap back. "You self-righteous bitch," she hissed. "You think you won? You think this is over?" I touched my stinging cheek, refusing to cower despite the throbbing pain. "It is over, Victoria. James is gone. The money is secure. All you're doing now is ensuring that when I do go to the police, and I will, there will be plenty of evidence of harassment and assault." She laughed again, that same brittle sound. "Go to the police. Tell them everything. How do you think that will play out, Eleanor? The whole town learning that their beloved James Mitchell was a cheating liar who kept a mistress for years? Your children hearing all the sordid details of their father's betrayal? Your grandchildren growing up with that legacy? It was a threat as effective as any physical intimidation. The scandal would be devastating, not just to me, but to everyone I loved. James's reputation, the business that bore his name, the memories our children cherished, all of it would be tarnished. What do you want? I asked finally, cutting to the heart of the matter. Victoria smiled, sensing an opening. What I've always wanted. My fair share. The will. Forget the will, she interrupted. We both know James intended to provide for me. That final clause was a moment of weakness, of guilt. It doesn't reflect his true wishes. I thought of the text messages I had read on James's phone. Eleanor will get what she deserves. Had that been guilt talking, as Victoria suggested? Or had James, in the end, chosen to protect his family's interests over his mistress's expectations? Even if that were true, I said carefully, I can't simply ignore the legal documents. The will is clear. Victoria's smile widened, turning predatory. But there are other ways. The business, for instance. Mitchell's Hardware could use a new marketing consultant, couldn't it? Someone to handle public relations, social media, advertising, at a very generous salary, of course. She was proposing a payoff, a way to extract money from James's estate without directly challenging the will. It was clever, I had to admit. And if it would end the threat to my family, I would need to discuss any business decisions with my children, I said, neither accepting nor rejecting her proposal outright. They own 49% of the company now. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. They'll follow your lead. And if they knew what was at stake, the scandal, the public humiliation, I'm sure they'd agree it's a small price to pay for discretion. I needed time to think, to consult with Michael, to consider options I might not yet have seen. I'll need a few days. Take all the time you need, Victoria said, stepping back at last. But not too long. My creditors aren't as patient as I am. I moved toward the door, the documents still clutched in my arms. Victoria made no move to stop me. Keep them, she said, nodding at the papers. Consider them a preview of what could become public knowledge if we can't reach an arrangement. I paused at the door, turning back to face her one last time. You loved him, I said, not a question but a statement. Something flickered across Victoria's face, a genuine emotion breaking through the calculating exterior. Yes, she admitted. More than you ever did, I suspect. Then why are you doing this? Why tarnish his memory with threats and scandal? She looked away, the mask slipping further. Because he left me with nothing. No future, no security, not even the dignity of acknowledgement. I was his dirty secret in life. I refused to remain invisible in his death. It was a moment of raw honesty that caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw Victoria not as a predator or a homewrecker, but as another victim of James's deceptions, a woman who had staked her future on promises that died with him. "I'll call you," I said, opening the door. "We'll figure something out." I left the hotel with my mind racing, torn between sympathy for Victoria's situation and wariness of her increasingly desperate tactics. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts too chaotic to focus on the familiar streets and landmarks of Westfield. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had reached a decision. I couldn't handle this alone. I needed allies, people who understood both the legal implications and the personal stakes. Inside the house, I disarmed the security system and went straight to James's office. I gathered the evidence from the safe, the phone, the notebook, the USB drive, and added it to the documents I had taken from Victoria's hotel room. Then I called Michael and Sarah, asking them to come over as soon as possible. It was time they knew everything. They arrived within the hour, concern etched on their faces as they took in my somber expression and the stack of evidence laid out on the dining room table. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah asked, dropping her purse on a chair. "You sounded strange on the phone." Michael was more direct. "Is this about Victoria Blackwood?" I nodded, gesturing for them to sit. "There's something you both need to know. The full story of your father's relationship with Victoria and the situation we're facing now." Over the next hour, I laid it all out for them. The affair, the financial support James had provided to Victoria, the evidence I'd found in both the safe and the hotel room, and finally, Victoria's proposal of a disguised payoff through the business. Sarah cried quietly as I spoke, while Michael's expression grew increasingly grim. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by Sarah's occasional sniffles. "She's blackmailing you," Michael said finally, his lawyer's mind cutting to the legal heart of the matter. "Threatening to create a scandal if we don't pay her off." "Essentially, yes," I agreed. "We should go to the police," Sarah insisted, wiping at her tears. "What she's doing is illegal." I shook my head. And what would that accomplish? A restraining order, at best. It wouldn't stop her from talking to the press, from sharing her story with anyone who would listen. "So, we just give in?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "Let her extort money from us?" "No," Michael interjected, his eyes fixed on the documents spread across the table. "We fight back, but not through the police or the courts. We need to be smarter than that." I looked at my son, seeing a calculated determination that reminded me of James at his most strategic. "What are you thinking?" "Victoria's leverage is the threat of scandal, of public humiliation," he said slowly. "But leverage works both ways. We need to find something she wants to keep hidden, something that would damage her as much as her revelations would damage us." "Blackmail her back." Sarah sounded uncertain. "Is that even legal?" Michael shrugged. "I'm not talking about blackmail. I'm talking about mutually assured destruction. A stalemate that keeps both sides from pushing the nuclear button." It was a cold, tactical approach, not the moral high ground I might have preferred, but perhaps the most practical solution under the circumstances. The restraining orders, I remembered suddenly. Harold said she had 2 previous boyfriends who filed restraining orders against her. If we could get the details, find out exactly what she did. "That's a start," Michael agreed. "And her finances. If she's been receiving money from Dad for years, has she been reporting it on her taxes? Has she been using company resources for personal expenses? There could be a dozen vulnerabilities we don't know about yet." Sarah looked between us, her expression troubled. "This feels wrong. Fighting fire with fire. We're better than this." "Are we?" I asked softly. "Your father wasn't. And now we're dealing with the consequences of his actions. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to protect what matters." Michael nodded in agreement, already pulling out his phone. "I know a private investigator in Chicago who's discreet and thorough. He can look into Victoria's background, her financial records, everything." As my children and I formulated our counter-strategy, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. The initial shock and grief of James's betrayal had given way to something else, a cold, steady resolve to protect what remained of our family by whatever means necessary. James had left us to clean up the mess he had created. And if that meant becoming someone I barely recognized, someone capable of threats and strategic thinking and moral compromise, then so be it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Harold Jenkins, his voice tense with urgency. "Eleanor, have you seen the Gazette today?" "No," I said, still groggy from a fitful sleep. "What's happened?" "You need to get a copy. Page 3. Victoria Blackwood has taken out a full-page advertisement." Fully awake now, I threw on a robe and hurried to the front porch where the morning paper waited. Flipping to page 3, I felt my blood run cold. Under the bold headline in memoriam, James Mitchell, Victoria had published what amounted to a love letter to my husband, describing their 5 beautiful years together and their plans for a future cut tragically short. It was carefully worded to avoid explicit claims of an affair, framed instead as a tribute from a special friend who had shared his deepest dreams and confidences. But the implication was clear to anyone who read between the lines. And in a small town like Westfield, everyone would be reading between the lines. My phone rang again, Sarah this time, her voice frantic. "Mom, have you seen?" "Yes," I interrupted. "I'm looking at it now." "This is exactly what you were afraid of. She's going public with everything." I stared at the newspaper, at Victoria's carefully crafted words that managed to paint herself as a grieving almost widow while casting a shadow over my entire marriage. It was the opening salvo in what promised to be a brutal campaign. "Mom," Sarah prompted when I didn't respond. "What do we do now?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Now we accelerate our plans. Call your brother. Tell him we need that investigator's results as soon as possible." After hanging up, I read the advertisement again, analyzing it with a detachment that surprised me. Victoria was testing the waters, seeing how I would react to this first, relatively mild revelation. It was a warning shot, a demonstration of her willingness to escalate if her demands weren't met. Two could play at that game. I dressed quickly and drove to the offices of the Westfield Gazette. Bill Thompson, the editor and publisher, had been a friend of James's for decades. He looked uncomfortable as I entered his office without an appointment. "Eleanor," he greeted me, rising from behind his desk. "I was going to call you about that advertisement." "I've seen it," I cut him off. "And I'd like to place one of my own for tomorrow's edition." Bill blinked in surprise. "Are you sure that's wise? These kinds of personal matters, they tend to escalate quickly in print." "I'm counting on it," I said, placing a neatly typed sheet of paper on his desk. Same size, same page. He read my copy quickly, his eyebrows rising as he processed the contents. "Eleanor, this is provocative." "It's the truth," I replied simply. Victoria Blackwood had her say. Now I'll have mine. Bill hesitated, clearly torn between friendship and professional responsibility. "People will talk." "They're already talking, Bill. I'm just making sure they hear both sides of the story." After leaving the newspaper office, I drove to Mitchell's Hardware, the original location downtown, the store James had built from nothing 30 years ago. I hadn't been there since before his death, and walking through the front door brought a wave of memories so powerful I had to pause just inside the entrance. James's presence was everywhere, in the layout he had designed, in the old-fashioned cash register he had insisted on keeping alongside the modern computer system, in the photographs of him that hung behind the counter showing the store's evolution over the decades. Dave Carson, the manager who had worked for James for over 20 years, looked up from helping a customer and did a double-take when he saw me. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, hurrying over after finishing with the customer. "This is a surprise. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Dave," I assured him, though we both knew it was a lie. "I just wanted to check in, see how things are running." Dave glanced around the store, which was busy despite the early hour. "Steady as always. Your husband built something special here. Something that will last." I nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion. That's actually why I'm here. I want to talk to you about the future of Mitchell's Hardware. We're treated to the small office at the back of the store, where Dave offered me James's chair behind the desk. I declined, taking the visitor's seat instead. I'll be taking a more active role in the business moving forward, I explained. As the majority shareholder, I have a responsibility to ensure that James's legacy continues. Dave looked surprised but not displeased. Of course. How can I help? I need to understand everything: the day-to-day operations, the finances, the staff, the inventory systems. I want full transparency. You'll have it, Dave promised. Though I have to admit, I'm a bit surprised. James always said you weren't interested in the business side of things. Another revelation, another way James had characterized me to others that didn't match reality. The truth was I had been interested, had even offered to help in the early years when the children were older and I had time. James had always deflected, insisting that the business was his domain, that I should focus on our home and family. Now I understood why. The business had been his alibi, his excuse, his cover story for the time he spent with Victoria. People change, I said simply. Circumstances change. Dave nodded, accepting this without question. Where would you like to start? With the books. All of them, official and unofficial. A flicker of unease crossed Dave's face. Unofficial. Dave, I said gently, I know my husband. I know there were aspects of the business he kept separate. I need to see everything, especially any records related to the second location. The second location, the store that Victoria had helped James acquire 5 years ago, the expansion that had coincided with the beginning of their affair. The store that, according to the notebook I had found in the safe, had served as their meeting place before the hotel room became their regular rendezvous point. Dave's discomfort was now obvious. Mrs. Mitchell, Eleanor, some of those records are sensitive. I know, I said, holding his gaze steadily. And I promise you, whatever I find, your position here is secure. I just need the truth. After a moment's hesitation, Dave unlocked a filing cabinet in the corner of the office and removed a leather-bound ledger similar to the one I had found in James's safe. He kept this separate from the main accounting system, Dave explained, placing it on the desk between us. Cash transactions mainly. Consulting fees, special bonuses, miscellaneous expenses. I opened the ledger, scanning the neat columns of figures and abbreviated notations. Most were innocuous. Cash discounts for preferred customers, bonuses for employees that James had wanted to keep off the official payroll to avoid questions of favoritism. But there, repeated monthly for the past 5 years, was a different kind of entry. VB Consulting, $5,000. $60,000 a year, paid in cash to Victoria Blackwood for consulting services that I was certain had nothing to do with hardware or retail management. Did you ever meet her? I asked Dave. Victoria Blackwood? He nodded reluctantly. A few times. She would come by the second location, usually on Tuesdays. James introduced her as a marketing consultant. And did she actually provide any marketing services? Advertising plans, social media strategies, anything tangible? Dave's silence was answer enough. Thank you for your honesty, I said, closing the ledger. I'd like to take this with me, if that's all right. Of course, Dave agreed quickly, seemingly relieved to have the ledger and its implications out of his possession. Will you be coming in regularly now? Yes, I decided in that moment. Starting next week, I'll be here 3 days a week. It's time I learned the family business properly. As I left the store with the ledger tucked safely in my purse, my phone rang again. It was Michael. Mom, we have a problem. A bigger one than the newspaper ad. My stomach tightened. What now? Victoria just filed a lawsuit against the estate. She's claiming she was Dad's common-law wife under Illinois law, based on the condo they shared in Chicago and various trips they took together. She's asking for half of everything, plus emotional damages. I stopped walking, the ground seeming to shift beneath my feet. Can she do that? Illinois isn't even our state. It's complicated, Michael said, his lawyer voice kicking in. She's arguing that their relationship was primarily based in Illinois, despite Dad's official residence being in Westfield. It's a stretch legally, but it will get attention. And that's the point, isn't it? To create enough of a spectacle that will settle rather than fight. What do we do? I'm already on it. RPI has found some interesting things about Victoria's past, including the fact that she was still legally married to someone else during the first 2 years of her relationship with Dad. That undermines her common law claims significantly. A strange laugh escaped me, bitter and disbelieving. So, she was cheating on her husband with my husband? The irony would be delicious if it weren't so tragic. It gets better, Michael continued. Her ex-husband is willing to talk. Apparently, she pulled something similar with him, claimed common law status to try to get at his family's money after they separated. It was a glimmer of hope, a potential weapon in our growing arsenal against Victoria's threats. Send me his contact information. I want to speak with him directly. Mom, are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe let me handle the legal side of this. This isn't just legal, Michael. It's personal. I need to understand what we're dealing with, who we're dealing with, from someone who's been in my position. After a moment's hesitation, Michael agreed. I'll text you his number. His name is Robert Keller. Lives in Milwaukee now. I thanked him and hung up, continuing to my car with a renewed sense of purpose. Victoria had escalated from threats to legal action. The battle lines were clearly drawn now, and I was gathering my own forces, my own strategies. As I started the car, my phone chimed with a text message, not from Michael with Robert Keller's contact information as I expected, but from an unknown number. Like my advertisement, Eleanor? Just a taste of what's to come. The lawsuit is on file now. Public record for anyone curious enough to look. Still want to play hardball? She was taunting me, confident in her position, certain that I would eventually cave to her demands rather than subject my family to prolonged public scrutiny. What Victoria didn't know, what James hadn't known either, apparently, was that beneath my calm exterior, my reputation as the steady, reliable wife and mother, there was a core of steel that had rarely been tested but had never broken. I typed a response, my fingers steady on the screen. Check tomorrow's Gazette, Victoria. Page 3. The game is just beginning. I sent the text and drove home, my mind already turning to what would come next. The advertisement I had placed would appear tomorrow, a response to Victoria's calculated insinuations. It would be direct and unflinching, in response to recent claims. As the legal widow of James Mitchell, I feel compelled to address certain statements published in yesterday's edition. While it is true that my late husband maintained relationships outside our marriage, it is important to clarify that these relationships were founded on deception and financial dependence, not the mutual respect and commitment that constitute a true partnership. The recent lawsuit filed against my husband's estate is without legal merit and will be vigorously defended. The claims contained therein are the desperate actions of someone facing the consequences of poor choices and financial mismanagement. I ask for privacy for my family during this difficult time, and for the community's discernment when evaluating sensationalized claims designed to damage reputations and extract unearned financial gain. With gratitude for your continued support, Eleanor Mitchell. It was measured yet pointed, acknowledging the affair while reframing the narrative around Victoria's financial motives. It would cause talk, certainly, but it would also demonstrate that I was not cowering in the shadows, that I was prepared to fight publicly, if necessary. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a car parked across the street, a black sedan with tinted windows that I didn't recognize. I tensed, scanning the street for any sign of Victoria or someone who might be watching the house on her behalf. The car door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, in his late 40s perhaps. He raised a hand in greeting and started walking toward me. "Mrs. Mitchell," he called. "Eleanor Mitchell?" I remained beside my car, keys clutched in my hand, ready to retreat into the house if necessary. "Yes? Who are you?" He stopped at a respectful distance, reaching into his jacket pocket to produce a business card. "Robert Keller. Your son Michael contacted me about Victoria Blackwood." Relief flooded through me. "Mr. Keller. I was just about to call you." He glanced at my house, then back at me. "Is there somewhere we could talk?" Somewhere more private than your front yard. I hesitated only briefly before nodding. There's a coffee shop downtown. We can meet there in 15 minutes. As he returned to his car, I went inside just long enough to change into fresh clothes and check my appearance in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me was a stranger, determined, calculating, with a hardness around the eyes that had never been there before. "Who are you becoming, Eleanor?" I whispered to my reflection, but deep down I knew the answer. I was becoming whatever I needed to be to survive this battle, to protect my family, to ensure that James's final act, securing our financial future, wasn't undone by the woman who had nearly destroyed everything else. And if that meant fighting Victoria Blackwood on her own terms, with her own tactics, then so be it. The game, as I had told her, was just beginning. The coffee shop was crowded when I arrived, but Robert Keller had secured a table in the back corner, away from curious ears. He stood as I approached, his expression a careful mix of sympathy and wariness. I recognized that look, the face of someone who had survived a storm and was now watching another person sail directly into it. If you've ever sat across from someone who understood your pain better than anyone else possibly could, you know how powerful that connection can be. Like and subscribe to hear how this encounter changed everything. "Mrs. Mitchell," Robert said, pulling out a chair for me. "Thank you for meeting me." "Eleanor, please," I replied, taking the seat. "And thank you for coming all the way from Milwaukee." He nodded, settling back into his own chair. "When your son called, I couldn't refuse. What Victoria did to your family, it's like watching history repeat itself." I studied him as he spoke. Robert Keller was handsome in a weathered way, salt and pepper hair, deep lines around his eyes, hands that fidgeted with his coffee cup as if they couldn't bear to be still. Here was a man who had been through his own version of the nightmare I was living. "Michael said you were married to Victoria?" I prompted. "For 3 years," Robert confirmed, though I didn't know it was ending until I found her in bed with my business partner. The scenario was so cliché, it might have been funny under different circumstances. "And she tried to claim common law status? Even though you were legally married?" Robert's laugh was short and bitter. "Victoria has never let facts get in the way of what she wants. After I filed for divorce, she countered by claiming our marriage had been abandoned 2 years earlier and that she had established a common law relationship with Thomas, my business partner, during that time." "That's absurd," I said. "How could she claim your marriage was abandoned when you were living together?" "We weren't. Not entirely," Robert admitted. "My work took me out of town regularly, construction management, big projects that required me to be on site for weeks at a time. Victoria used those absences to build her case. Claimed I had emotionally and physically abandoned the marriage and that she and Thomas had been living as husband and wife whenever I was away. The parallels to my own situation were striking. James's frequent business trips, his Tuesday afternoon absences, the gradually expanding distance between us that I had attributed to the natural evolution of a long marriage rather than deliberate withdrawal. "Did it work?" I asked. "Her legal strategy?" Robert shook his head. "Not ultimately, but it cost me nearly $100,000 in legal fees to fight it, plus another $50,000 in a settlement just to make her go away. And the damage to my reputation, my business relationships." He trailed off, the memory clearly still painful years later. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "That must have been devastating." "It was," he agreed, "but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because Victoria Blackwood is a predator, and you need to understand what you're up against." I raised an eyebrow. "A predator? That's a strong word." "And accurate," Robert insisted. "Victoria doesn't just stumble into these situations. She selects her targets carefully, successful men with something to lose. Men whose schedules create natural opportunities for deception. Men who are vulnerable." James wasn't vulnerable. I objected automatically, then paused, reconsidering. Had he been? The James the first thought I knew had been solid, dependable, secure in himself and his place in the world. But had there been cracks in that foundation that I had failed to see? Midlife insecurities, professional plateaus, The gradual recalibration of a man facing his 60s and wondering if this was all there was? Every man is vulnerable to something, Robert said quietly. Victoria is exceptionally good at identifying what that something is. How did you meet her? I asked, curious about the beginning of their story, wondering if it would illuminate the beginning of Victoria and James's relationship. At a charity auction, Robert recalled. I was there representing my company. We donated construction services for a community center. Victoria was working for the event planning firm. She approached me, complimented my bid, told me she admired men who gave back to their communities. He smiled ruefully. Looking back, it was textbook. Flattery, shared values, the implication that she saw something special in me that others missed. It was impossible not to wonder if James had been seduced in a similar way, if Victoria had approached him with carefully calculated compliments designed to target his specific insecurities and desires. Michael mentioned something about other restraining orders? I prompted. Robert nodded, his expression darkening. After our divorce, I started hearing from other men, an architect I'd worked with, a developer from Chicago. They'd had similar experiences with Victoria. Affairs that ended badly, followed by escalating behavior, showing up at their homes, contacting their families, threatening to expose the relationships unless certain considerations were made. Blackmail. I translated. Essentially, yes, though always just vague enough to avoid crossing clear legal lines. Victoria is smart, Eleanor. She knows exactly how far she can push before triggering serious consequences. And the restraining orders? How did those come about? Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. In my case, she began showing up at job sites, creating scenes that threatened my professional relationships. For Thomas, my former business partner, it was more extreme. After their relationship ended, she slashed his tires, sent disturbing packages to his office, even posted intimate photos online with just enough of his face obscured that he couldn't prove it was definitely him. A chill ran through me. This was a side of Victoria I hadn't yet witnessed. Not just manipulative and opportunistic, but potentially dangerous. Has she threatened you? Robert asked. Beyond the legal action, I mean. I thought of the note she had left in my home, the photographs of me with red circles and derogatory comments, the calculated intimidation of her newspaper advertisement. Yes, I admitted. Though nothing explicitly violent yet. Yet, Robert repeated, emphasizing the word. That's the key. With Victoria, there's always escalation. When one approach doesn't work, she tries another, then another, each more extreme than the last. What stopped her in your case? Robert leaned forward, lowering his voice despite our relative privacy. Evidence. Documentation of everything. The harassment, the manipulation, the lies. I built a case so comprehensive that her own attorney advised her to back off. And he hesitated. And I prompted. And I found her weakness. The one thing she couldn't afford to have exposed. My pulse quickened. Which was? Robert glanced around, then reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small USB drive, sliding it across the table to me. It's all here. Financial records, witness statements, photographs, recordings, everything I collected. Including information about a period in Victoria's life she's gone to great lengths to erase. I picked up the drive, turning it over in my fingers. What kind of information? Before she reinvented herself as Victoria Blackwood, successful real estate agent and sophisticated woman about town, she was Vicki Simmons from Gary, Indiana, with a record. A criminal record? I clarified, surprised despite everything I had learned about Victoria so far. Robert nodded. Nothing major. Check fraud, identity theft, misdemeanor charges that were eventually reduced or dismissed. But enough to end her career in real estate if the licensing board were to find out. She's kept it buried, changed her name, created an entirely new history for herself. It was a revelation and potentially powerful leverage against Victoria's threats. But something about Robert's eagerness to share this information made me wary. Why are you helping me? I asked directly. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Robert's expression softened. When your son contacted me, described what Victoria was doing to your family, I couldn't stand by and let it happen again. Not if I could help prevent it. It seemed genuine enough, but experience had made me cautious. "Thank you," I said, pocketing the USB drive. "This could be very useful." "Use it carefully," Robert advised. "Victoria is dangerous when cornered. Make sure you have protection, security systems, witnesses when you interact with her, documentation of everything." "I've already upgraded my home security," I assured him, "and I'm keeping detailed records of all our interactions." Robert nodded approvingly.
Good.
"You're already ahead of where I was when everything fell apart." He hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing you should know about Victoria." "What's that?" "She doesn't work alone. At least, she didn't with me. She had help. Someone feeding her information about my schedule, my finances, my vulnerabilities." A cold suspicion formed in my mind.
Who?
In my case, it was my assistant. Someone I trusted completely, who had access to every aspect of my life. And in James's case? I pressed. Robert spread his hands. "I can't say for certain, but I'd look closely at anyone who had intimate knowledge of your husband's movements, his finances, his personal information." The implication was clear. Victoria might have had an accomplice within James's business or social circle, someone who had facilitated the affair and perhaps continued to assist her even after his death. We talked for another hour, Robert sharing specific strategies that had worked against Victoria and warning signs to watch for as her tactics escalated. By the time we parted, the coffee shop had emptied of its morning crowd, and I felt both better prepared and more deeply concerned about what might lie ahead. "Be careful, Eleanor," Robert said as we stood to leave. "And call me if you need anything, advice, a witness, whatever. I want to see Victoria stopped before she does to your family what she did to mine." I thanked him again and walked to my car, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. My mind was racing with possibilities, with new angles to consider, with potential allies and enemies I hadn't previously identified. The afternoon edition of the Westfield Gazette would be hitting newsstands soon, carrying my response to Victoria's advertisement. It was a public declaration of war, and I knew Victoria would retaliate. The question was how, and against whom. I drove to Mitchell's Hardware, where I had arranged to meet Michael to discuss our next steps. He was waiting in James's office, laptop open, surrounded by papers and legal reference books. "How is Keller?" he asked as I entered, not looking up from his work. "Informative," I replied, placing the USB drive on the desk in front of him. "And generous with his resources." Michael glanced at the drive, then back at me. "What's this?" "Everything Robert Keller collected about Victoria during and after their marriage, including some revelations about her past that she's worked hard to keep hidden." Now I had Michael's full attention. He picked up the drive, turning it over as I had done earlier. "Is it enough? To stop her, I mean." "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's more than we had this morning." I filled him in on what Robert had shared, particularly the suggestion that Victoria might have had an accomplice in her relationship with James. Michael frowned. "An inside man?
Who would do that?"
I shook my head. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." We spent the next hour developing a strategy, combining the legal countermeasures Michael was preparing with the personal and financial leverage Robert's information might provide. It was surreal, sitting in James's office, plotting against his mistress, using the very skills of analysis and planning that he had employed in building his business. "The newspaper should be out by now," Michael noted, checking his watch. "Are you ready for the fallout?" I wasn't, not really, but I nodded anyway. It had to be done. We can't let Victoria control the narrative. Michael's phone rang. Sarah, calling from the house where she had been sorting through more of James's belongings. "Michael?" Her voice was tight with tension. "You and Mom need to come home."
Now.
"What's happened?" Michael demanded, immediately on alert. "Just come," Sarah insisted. "And hurry." We drove home in tense silence, a dozen scenarios playing through my mind. Had Victoria escalated from threats to action? Had she returned to the house, perhaps damaged property, or left more threatening messages? The answer was waiting in our driveway, spray-painted across the garage door in vivid red letters. "Liar." "Jesus," Michael muttered as we pulled up, taking in the vandalism. Sarah met us at the front door, her face pale with shock. "It gets worse," she said, leading us inside. The house appeared undisturbed at first glance, but as we moved into the living room, I saw what had prompted Sarah's urgent call. The framed wedding portrait that had hung above the fireplace, James and I, young and radiant with hope for our future, had been removed from the wall and placed on the coffee table. The glass was shattered, and across James's smiling face, written in what appeared to be lipstick, was a single word: mine. "The security system?" Michael asked, looking at the control panel by the front door. "Was it disabled?" Sarah shook her head. "That's the strangest part. It was still armed when I got here. No alarms, no sign of forced entry." A cold realization settled over me. "She has a key." "That's not possible," Michael objected. "We changed all the locks after the first incident." "Someone let her in then," I said, remembering Robert's warning about accomplices. "Or she has other ways of accessing the house that we haven't discovered." We did a thorough search, checking every room, every closet, every potential hiding place. Nothing else appeared to be disturbed or missing. The violation was symbolic rather than practical, a message that Victoria could reach us, could touch our most personal spaces and memories, whenever she chose. "We need to call the police," Sarah insisted. "This is breaking and entering, vandalism, harassment. And what proof do we have that it was Victoria?" Michael interrupted. "No witnesses, no camera footage, nothing that directly ties her to this." He was right, of course. The carefully calculated nature of the intrusion, targeted, symbolic, without clear evidence, was exactly what Robert had described as Victoria's typical approach. Just threatening enough to create fear, just ambiguous enough to avoid clear legal consequences. "We still file a report," I decided. "Start the paper trail, even if this specific incident doesn't lead to charges. And we upgrade the security again, cameras inside and out, motion sensors, everything." While Michael called the police, I took a closer look at the damaged wedding portrait. The frame was antique silver, a gift from my parents for our first anniversary. The photograph inside was the official portrait from our wedding day, June 14th, 1987. I had been 22, James 25. We had looked at the camera with the serene confidence of people who believed they understood exactly what the future held. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I carefully removed the shattered glass, something caught my eye, a small white corner peeking out from behind the photograph. I extracted it carefully, a Polaroid, yellowed with age, showing a much younger Victoria with her arm around an equally young man who was decidedly not James. They stood in front of a modest house, both smiling broadly. The man had his hand resting possessively on Victoria's stomach, which showed the slight curve of early pregnancy. Written on the white border in faded blue ink, "Vicky and Tom, 3 months along. April 1996.
Vicky.
The name Robert had mentioned, Victoria's original identity before she had reinvented herself. And evidence of a life, a relationship, perhaps even a child that was nowhere to be found in the carefully curated history she had presented to James. I slipped the Polaroid into my pocket just as the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the police. The next hour was consumed with official statements, photographs of the vandalism, and politely skeptical questions from officers who clearly viewed this as a minor incident in an otherwise quiet town. "We'll file the report," the lead officer assured us as they prepared to leave. But without witnesses or clear evidence pointing to a specific perpetrator. "We understand," Michael said, escorting them to the door with the practiced diplomacy of a corporate attorney. Once they were gone, I showed Michael and Sarah the Polaroid I had found behind the wedding photograph. "Victoria left this deliberately," I said. "It's another message."
Sarah studied the image.
"She was pregnant? Does that mean she has a child somewhere?" "Or had one," Michael pointed out. "There's a lot we still don't know about her past." The Polaroid, combined with the information Robert had provided, offered new avenues to explore, new ways to understand Victoria, and, potentially, new leverage to use against her. But it also raised disturbing questions about why she had planted this specific piece of her history in our home. what it meant in the context of her relationship with James. "I need some air," I announced suddenly, the walls of the house seeming to close in around me. "I'm going for a walk." Neither Michael nor Sarah objected, though I could see the concern in their eyes. The vandalism had rattled them, made the threat Victoria posed more concrete and immediate. But I needed space to think, to process everything that had happened in the dizzying hours since my meeting with Robert Keller. The late afternoon was mild, the streets of our neighborhood quiet as I walked without any particular destination in mind. Houses I had passed hundreds of times over the decades now seemed different somehow, each potentially harboring secrets behind their neat facades, each containing stories more complicated than their manicured lawns and tidy porches suggested. Had I been naive all these years? Had I willfully ignored signs of James's discontent, his deception? Or had he simply been that skilled at compartmentalizing his life, at presenting one face to his family and another to Victoria? My aimless wandering eventually led me to Parkside Drive, where the Westfield Gazette offices occupied a modest brick building with large front windows. Through the glass, I could see activity inside, staff members moving with unusual urgency, gathered in small clusters of intense conversation. Something was happening. On impulse, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up, recognition flashing across her face immediately. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying enough to turn several heads in my direction. "I'm not sure you should be here right now." "Why not?" I asked, noting the sudden hush that had fallen over the previously bustling office. Before she could answer, Bill Thompson emerged from his office, his face a mask of professional neutrality that didn't quite conceal his discomfort at seeing me. "Eleanor," he greeted me, glancing nervously at the staff members who had stopped pretending to work and were openly watching our interaction. "This is unexpected. What's going on, Bill?" I asked directly. "Something's happening here. I can feel it." He hesitated, clearly weighing his options, then sighed. "You'd better come into my office." I followed him, aware of the eyes tracking our movement, the whispered comments that began the moment we passed. Bill closed the door behind us and gestured to a chair, which I ignored, preferring to remain standing. "Victoria Blackwood came in about an hour ago," he said without preamble. "She had a story she wanted to tell. An exclusive interview about her relationship with James." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "And you agreed to publish it?" Bill spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Eleanor, you know how this works. It's news. Controversial, yes, but newsworthy. Especially after the dueling advertisements you two placed." "What did she say?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's better if you read it yourself." Bill turned to his computer, tapped a few keys, and swiveled the monitor toward me. On the screen was a draft layout for tomorrow's front page, dominated by a large photograph of Victoria sitting in what appeared to be the hotel room where she and James had conducted their affair. The headline read, "The Other Woman Speaks. Victoria Blackwood reveals 5-year relationship with James Mitchell." I forced myself to read the article, each paragraph more damaging than the last. Victoria portrayed herself as James's true partner, the woman who had supported his dreams when I had allegedly become distant and uninterested. She spoke of their plans to divorce me, to start a new life together in Chicago, plans supposedly delayed by concern for our children and, ultimately, cut short by James's death. Most devastating were the intimate details she shared, conversations, habits, preferences that suggested a level of knowledge about James that could only come from genuine closeness. She described his tendency to hum while he worked, the small scar on his left shoulder from a childhood bicycle accident, his fear of flying that he masked with carefully timed glasses of scotch before boarding. These were true details, intimate glimpses of a man I had loved for decades. Their accuracy made her larger narrative, that James had loved her, had planned a future with her, more credible, more difficult to dismiss. "You can't publish this," I said finally, looking up from the screen. Bill sighed. "Eleanor, I understand your position, but—" "No, you don't understand," I interrupted. "This isn't about protecting James's reputation or my feelings. It's about the truth. I reached into my pocket and withdrew the Polaroid, placing it on Bill's desk. Victoria Blackwood isn't who she claims to be. Before she targeted my husband, she was Vicky Simmons from Gary, Indiana. With a criminal record she's concealed from the Real Estate Licensing Board, from her clients, and almost certainly from James. Bill picked up the photograph, studying it with the practiced eye of a newsman who recognized a potential story when he saw one. "How do you know this?" "I have documentation," I said, thinking of Robert's USB drive and the information it contained. Records, witness statements, evidence of a pattern of behavior targeting wealthy, married men. Victoria Blackwood is a predator, Bill. Not a victim, not a star-crossed lover. A predator who selected James as her target and is now trying to extort money from his estate by threatening his reputation and his family's peace of mind. Bill looked from the Polaroid to me, his journalistic instincts clearly engaged. "That's a different angle than what she's presenting." "It's the truth," I insisted. "And if you're going to print her version of events, you have an obligation to print mine as well. Not in competing advertisements or quotes buried at the end of her narrative, but as a full, equal presentation of the facts." He considered this, tapping his fingers on the desk. "You have actual evidence to support these claims? Documents, testimonials, something concrete?" "Yes," I confirmed. "And I'm prepared to share it with you, exclusively, on one condition. Which is, you hold Victoria's interview for 24 hours. Give me time to provide you with a full story, with supporting evidence. Then you can publish both perspectives together and let your readers decide which is more credible." Bill's journalistic ethics warred visibly with his business instincts. Victoria's sensational claims would sell papers, drive online traffic, generate exactly the kind of controversy that small-town newspapers depend on for survival in the digital age. "Please, Bill," I added, seeing his hesitation. "We've known each other for 30 years. James was your friend. All I'm asking is one day to present the other side of the story." After a long moment, he nodded. 24 hours. "But Eleanor, the evidence has to be solid. I can't publish accusations of criminal history, fraud, or predatory behavior without substantiation." "You'll have it," I promised, relief flooding through me. "By this time tomorrow." As I left the Gazette offices, my mind was already racing with next steps. I needed to organize the information from Robert's USB drive to build a coherent narrative that would counter Victoria's carefully crafted portrayal of star-crossed love. I needed to find additional sources, other men she might have targeted, perhaps even locate the man from the Polaroid, Tom, and the child Victoria had apparently been carrying. Most of all, I needed to understand why Victoria had deliberately left that specific photograph for me to find. What was she trying to communicate? Was it a warning, a confession, or something else entirely? When I returned home, I found Michael and Sarah in the kitchen with David, who had driven in from his home in the suburbs after hearing about the vandalism. They looked up as I entered, their conversations stopping mid-sentence. "Where have you been?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. "We were getting worried." "The Gazette," I replied, accepting the cup of coffee David offered. "Victoria gave them an interview. It's comprehensive and persuasive." I explained the situation, the deal I had struck with Bill Thompson, and the urgent need to compile our counter-narrative within the next 24 hours. "We should focus on the restraining orders," Michael suggested. "Those are public record, concrete evidence of a pattern of behavior." "And the financial angle," David added. "If we can show she was dependent on Dad, that she had monetary motives for the relationship, it undermines the love story she's trying to sell." Sarah was examining the Polaroid, her expression troubled. "What about this?" she asked. "A pregnancy, possibly a child. If Victoria has a secret family somewhere, that's significant." "All of it matters," I agreed. "We need a comprehensive approach that addresses every aspect of her claims and introduces the facts she's conveniently omitting." We divided tasks. Michael would organize the legal documents and public records. David would handle the financial analysis, tracking Victoria's economic situation before, during, and after her relationship with James. Sarah would search for information about the man in the Polaroid and any child that might have resulted from that relationship. And I would begin the painful process of reviewing the evidence of James's betrayal, the text messages, emails, and photographs that documented his relationship with Victoria, looking for inconsistencies, for moments of doubt or hesitation that would contradict her portrayal of unwavering devotion. It was nearly midnight when we finally paused, exhausted but making progress. The dining room table was covered with documents, laptops, and empty coffee cups. We had constructed a timeline of Victoria's life that revealed significant gaps and contradictions, identified financial transfers that suggested exploitation rather than genuine partnership, and begun drafting a counter-narrative that exposed the manipulative nature of her relationship with James without denying the basic fact of the affair. "We should get some rest," I suggested, noting the fatigue evident on my children's faces. "Continue in the morning." They reluctantly agreed, David and Sarah heading upstairs to their old bedrooms while Michael opted to sleep on the couch, unwilling to leave me alone in the house despite the upgraded security. I retired to my bedroom, our bedroom, but sleep eluded me. The day's revelations swirled in my mind, each new piece of information about Victoria opening fresh questions about James. Had he known about her criminal past? Had he been aware of her history of targeting wealthy men? Had he genuinely loved her, as she claimed, or had he been another in a series of victims, manipulated by a skilled predator who knew exactly which buttons to push? Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and returned to the dining room, drawn to the materials we had gathered. In the quiet darkness, lit only by the soft glow of my laptop screen, I opened Robert's USB drive and began methodically exploring its contents. The files were organized chronologically, beginning with Victoria's early history as Vicky Simmons. There were school records from Gary, Indiana, employment histories showing a series of short-term jobs in retail and food service, arrest records for check fraud and identity theft, both from her early 20s, divorce papers from a brief first marriage to a man named Alan Kessler. But it was a folder labeled Thomas Hewitt that caught my attention, the name matching the Tom from the Polaroid. Inside were photographs, emails, legal documents, and a video file titled Victoria_Confession, MP4. I clicked on the video, turning the volume low to avoid waking Michael in the living room. The footage was grainy, clearly recorded surreptitiously. It showed Victoria, younger, with shorter hair but unmistakably her, sitting in what appeared to be a restaurant booth. Across from her, mostly out of frame except for his hands, sat a man. "I need to hear you say it, Vicky," the man's voice demanded. "I need to hear you admit what you did." Victoria looked nervous, glancing around as if checking for witnesses. "I told you already. It wasn't personal. It was just business." "Business." The man's voice rose slightly. "You call what you did to me, to my family, business?" She sighed, looking directly at the camera without seeming to realize it was recording. "What do you want me to say, Tom? That I targeted you because you were successful? That I researched your finances before I ever approached you at that charity event? That the pregnancy was a calculated move to gain leverage?"
Fine.
"It's all true. Is that what you wanted to hear?" My breath caught in my throat. The confession was more damning than I could have imagined. Explicit admission of predatory behavior, of using pregnancy as manipulation, of selecting targets based on financial potential. "And the baby?" Tom's voice asked, tight with emotion. "Was that part of your business plan too?" Victoria's expression hardened. "There was no baby, Tom. There never was. The positive test I showed you was bought online. The sonogram belonged to my cousin. By the time you figured it out, I already had access to your accounts, your property, everything I needed." I paused the video, my hand shaking slightly on the mouse. The Polaroid showing Victoria pregnant had been taken in April 1996, according to the notation. She had been with a man named Tom, apparently faking a pregnancy to gain financial leverage. And nearly 30 years later, she had deliberately planted this photograph in my home, behind my wedding portrait.
Why?
What message was she trying to send? I continued watching the video, in which Victoria proceeded to outline her strategy for targeting wealthy men, her techniques for creating dependency and isolating them from supportive relationships, and her methods for extracting maximum financial benefit before moving on to the next target. It was chilling in its calculation, its complete lack of remorse or emotional connection. The Victoria in this video bore little resemblance to the passionate, devoted partner she had described in her Gazette interview. By the time the video ended, I was certain of one thing: James had been a mark, not a lover. Victoria's apparent grief, her claims of thwarted love and future plans, all of it was performance, a script she had refined through previous relationships with men like Robert Keller and Thomas Hewitt. I spent the next several hours compiling the most damning evidence from Robert's files, organizing it into a coherent narrative that directly countered Victoria's claims. By dawn, I had a draft that exposed her history of fraud, her pattern of targeting wealthy men, and her use of calculated tactics to create the illusion of genuine relationship. As the first light of morning filtered through the dining room windows, I heard movement in the living room, Michael stirring, then the sound of his footsteps approaching. "Mom," he called softly, appearing in the doorway. "Have you been up all night?" I nodded, gesturing to the laptop screen. "I found something. Something that changes everything." I showed him the video, the documents, the pattern of behavior that spanned decades. As he absorbed the information, his expression shifted from concern to grim satisfaction.
"This is it," he said.
"This is what we need to stop her." "Not just stop her," I clarified. "Expose her. Completely and publicly." The strategy we had been developing suddenly seemed inadequate. A defensive response in the local newspaper wouldn't be enough. Victoria Blackwood, or Vicky Simmons, or whatever name she was truly entitled to, needed to be revealed for what she was, not just to our small community, but to anyone she might target in the future. We need to go bigger, I decided. Beyond the Gazette. Regional news, real estate licensing boards, law enforcement in the states where she's operated. Michael looked uncertain. "That's aggressive, Mom. Are you sure that's the direction you want to take this?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Victoria chose this battlefield when she targeted James, when she threatened our family, when she broke into our home. I won't just defend. I'll counterattack with everything we have." As Sarah and David joined us, awakened by the sound of our conversation, I outlined the expanded strategy. We would still provide Bill Thompson with our counter-narrative for tomorrow's paper, but we would also prepare press packets for larger news outlets, formal complaints to regulatory agencies, and reports to police departments in multiple jurisdictions. "It's all-out war," David observed, concern evident in his voice. "There's no going back from this, Mom. Once we take these steps, the whole story becomes public. Dad's affair, Victoria's criminal history, all of it." "I know," I acknowledged. "But the alternative is allowing Victoria to control the narrative, to continue threatening and manipulating us, to potentially move on to her next target when she's extracted whatever she can from our family." The decision made, we resumed our work with renewed purpose. Michael left for the courthouse to obtain certified copies of the restraining orders filed against Victoria. David contacted financial institutions to document the pattern of transfers from James's accounts. Sarah focused on creating a comprehensive timeline of Victoria's activities, cross-referencing it with James's known movements over the past 5 years. I called Robert Keller to thank him for the information he had provided and to ask if he would be willing to go on record with his experiences. His agreement was immediate and unequivocal. "I've been waiting years for a chance to expose Victoria," he said. "I'll tell anyone who will listen what she did to me, to Thomas, to your husband." By mid-afternoon, we had assembled a damning dossier on Victoria Blackwood, evidence of fraud, manipulation, harassment, and potential blackmail spanning more than 2 decades. The counter-narrative for the Gazette was complete, supplemented with documents, photographs, and statements from multiple sources. I called Bill Thompson to let him know we were ready to deliver our response to Victoria's interview. "Bring it in," he said, sounding simultaneously intrigued and apprehensive. "I'll hold the front page." As I prepared to leave for the Gazette offices, my phone rang, an unknown number that I almost ignored, assuming it was another reporter seeking comment on the growing scandal. but something made me answer. "Eleanor Mitchell," I said, my tone businesslike. "Mrs. Mitchell." The voice was unfamiliar, female, with a slight accent I couldn't immediately place. "My name is Anna Hewitt. I believe you've been looking for information about my father, Thomas, and his relationship with Victoria Blackwood." I sat down abruptly, signaling to Michael, who was gathering documents nearby. "Yes," I confirmed. "How did you know?" "A friend at the courthouse called my father when someone requested copies of his restraining order against Victoria. Dad asked me to reach out. I'm an attorney in Chicago." "I appreciate the call," I said carefully, unsure of her intentions. "What can I do for you, Miss Hewitt?" "It's what I can do for you," she replied. "I represented my father during his legal battles with Victoria. I have documentation that might be useful to you, depositions, financial records, even recordings of conversations that were never entered into evidence because Victoria settled rather than let them become public." It seemed too good to be true, another source of evidence against Victoria, potentially even more damning than what Robert had provided. But caution was warranted. "Why would you share this with me?" I asked directly. Anna's laugh was short and bitter, reminiscent of her father's. "Because Victoria Blackwood destroyed my parents' marriage, nearly bankrupted my father, and caused my mother so much stress that she suffered a heart attack at 52. Because I've spent years watching her move from target to target without consequences. And because when I saw the advertisements in your local paper, hers and yours, I recognized the pattern immediately." "I'd very much like to see what you have," I said, making a decision. "Can you send digital copies?" "Better," Anna replied. "I'm in Milwaukee on business. I can drive to Westfield this evening with the originals." We arranged to meet at 7 at Mitchell's Hardware, where the security cameras and presence of staff would provide witnesses to our interaction. I thanked Anna for her call, trying not to let my excitement show too obviously in my voice. After hanging up, I explained the development to my children, who shared my cautious optimism about this potential new ally and source of evidence. "This could be the final piece we need," Michael said, reviewing our assembled materials. "With testimonials from both Robert Keller and Thomas Hewitt's daughter, plus the documentary evidence from both sources, Victoria's credibility will be completely undermined." With renewed confidence, I drove to the Gazette offices, where Bill Thompson was waiting with barely concealed anticipation. I handed him a thick folder containing our counter-narrative, supporting documents, and contact information for sources willing to go on record. "It's all here," I told him. "Victoria's criminal history, her pattern of targeting wealthy men, the fraudulent claims she's made about her relationship with James, everything." Bill flipped through the materials, his journalistic instincts clearly engaged despite whatever personal discomfort he might feel about publishing such explosive content about people he knew. "This is comprehensive," he admitted. "And these sources are willing to be named? To stand behind these claims?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Robert Keller has already provided a formal statement. And I'm meeting with Thomas Hewitt's daughter this evening, who has additional documentation from Victoria's time in Chicago." Bill looked up sharply. "Thomas Hewitt? The developer?" I nodded, surprised by his recognition of the name. "You know him?" "By reputation," Bill clarified. "He's fairly well known in Chicago real estate circles. If he's willing to go on record about Victoria Blackwood." "His daughter is bringing documents this evening," I repeated. "I can provide you with additional materials tomorrow if needed." Bill tapped the folder thoughtfully. "That won't be necessary for tomorrow's edition. This is more than enough to balance Victoria's interview." He hesitated, then added, "Eleanor, have you considered the implications of publishing all of this? Not just for Victoria, but for James's memory, for your family?" It was a fair question, one I had been wrestling with since discovering the full extent of Victoria's deception. Publishing the truth would mean acknowledging James's affair publicly, confirming that he had been duped by a practiced manipulator, perhaps even revealing financial improprieties in how he had funded his relationship with Victoria. "I've considered it," I said carefully, "and I've discussed it with my children. We believe that the truth, however painful, is preferable to allowing Victoria's version of events to stand unchallenged. James made mistakes, serious ones. But he doesn't deserve to be remembered as someone who would abandon his family for a woman like Victoria Blackwood. Bill nodded, apparently satisfied with my response. We'll run both stories tomorrow, Victoria's interview alongside your counter-narrative, with equal prominence. After that, he spread his hands in a gesture that acknowledged the unpredictable nature of public response. After that, the truth will speak for itself. I finished for him. I left the Gazette offices feeling lighter than I had in days, as if setting the record straight, or at least ensuring that both sides would be presented fairly, had lifted some of the burden I had been carrying since James's death. The sun was setting as I drove to Mitchell's Hardware for my meeting with Anna Hewitt. The store would be closed by now, but Dave Carson had agreed to let us use the office space, citing his own uncomfortable encounters with Victoria during her visits to the second location. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a sleek black SUV already parked near the entrance, likely Anna's rental, given the Milwaukee plates. I gathered my purse and the USB drive containing our assembled evidence, planning to share our findings with Anna just as she would be sharing hers with us. The store was dark except for a light in the back office. I used my key to enter, calling out as I did so. "Hello? Dave? Ms. Hewitt?" No response. I moved through the familiar aisles, past displays of tools and home improvement supplies, toward the office where James had spent so many hours over the decades. The door was ajar, a strip of light spilling out into the darkened store. "Hello?" I called again, pushing the door open wider. The office was empty. Confused, I checked my watch. 10 minutes to 7. I was early for our meeting, but if the SUV outside belonged to Anna, she was early as well. Perhaps she had stepped out momentarily, or Dave had shown her to another part of the store. I set my purse on the desk and was about to call Dave's cell phone when I noticed something on the blotter, a white envelope with my name written on it in unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it cautiously, half expecting another threat from Victoria. Instead, I found a brief note in the same handwriting as the envelope. "Mrs. Mitchell. Unavoidably delayed. Please wait. Important information to share. Anna Hewitt." Relieved, I settled into the chair behind the desk, using the time to review our counter-narrative one more time, looking for any weaknesses or oversights that Victoria might exploit. The evidence was solid, the testimonials compelling, the timeline of her activities damning in its consistency. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I felt a sense of control, of forward momentum. Whatever damage Victoria had done, to my marriage, to my family, to my understanding of the past 4 decades, she would not determine my future. That power remained mine. The sound of the front door opening interrupted my thoughts. Footsteps moved through the store, heading toward the office, lighter than Dave's heavy tread, more purposeful than a casual browser. "Ms. Hewitt," I called, rising from the chair. The footsteps paused, then continued, more deliberate now. A shadow appeared in the doorway, backlit by the dim emergency lighting from the main store area. "Not exactly," said a familiar voice, Victoria's voice, smooth as honey and cold as ice. "But I believe we have an appointment nonetheless." She stepped into the light, and I suppressed a gasp. Gone was the polished, sophisticated woman I had encountered at the funeral home and the hotel. In her place stood someone harder, sharper. Her hair pulled back severely, her makeup minimal, her clothing dark and practical. Most alarming was the object in her right hand, a small pistol, pointed directly at me. "What have you done with Anna Hewitt?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I expected given the circumstances. Victoria's laugh was genuine, if humorless. "Oh, Eleanor, there is no Anna Hewitt. There never was. Just as there was no baby with Thomas Hewitt. Just as there was no future with James. Some things are convenient fictions." I should have been more cautious, should have verified Anna's identity before agreeing to this isolated meeting. But the evidence against Victoria had been so compelling, so comprehensive, that I had wanted to believe we had found another ally against her. "What do you want?" I asked, eyeing the distance to the door, calculating my chances of reaching it before she could react. "Don't," Victoria warned, seeming to read my thoughts. I was a competitive shooter in college. Another detail James never knew about me. She gestured with the gun toward the chair.
Seat.
I complied, my mind racing. The store was closed, the streets outside quiet at this hour. Dave Carson had left after unlocking the office for me, trusting me to lock up when my meeting concluded. No one would be coming to interrupt whatever Victoria had planned. I asked what you want. I repeated, playing for time, hoping my absence would eventually be noticed by Michael or Sarah. Victoria leaned against the doorframe, the gun never wavering from its aim at my chest. Originally, money, security, the future James promised me.
But now.
She smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. Now I want you to understand exactly who you're dealing with before I destroy everything you care about. I already know who you are, I countered. Vicky Simmons from Gary, Indiana, with a record for fraud and identity theft. A woman who targets wealthy men, manipulates them emotionally and financially, then moves on to the next victim. Something flickered across Victoria's face, surprise, perhaps, that I had uncovered so much of her past. Very good, she acknowledged. Robert Keller, I presume? Always so eager to play the wounded victim, as if he didn't know exactly what he was getting into. Not just Robert, I said, gaining confidence despite the weapon trained on me. Thomas Hewitt as well. And others, I suspect. You've left quite a trail, Victoria. Necessary risks, she dismissed. But you've missed the most important part of the story, Eleanor. The part James never knew, the part that would have changed everything if he had. Despite myself, I was intrigued. What else could there be, beyond the criminal history, the pattern of predatory behavior, the calculated deceptions? Which is? Victoria's smile widened, taking on a quality I could only describe as anticipatory, as if she had been waiting for this moment, this revelation. The part where I knew exactly who James was from the very beginning, where I selected him specifically, researched him thoroughly, and approached him with a plan already in motion. That's not surprising, I said, though in truth, the calculated nature of her targeting was chilling. It fits your established pattern. But the reason, Eleanor, the reason I chose James, specifically. Victoria straightened, her posture shifting subtly. Tell me, did you ever wonder why, after targeting wealthy, powerful men in Chicago, I would suddenly turn my attention to a small-town hardware store owner in Westfield? The question had occurred to me fleetingly. James had been successful by local standards, comfortable but hardly wealthy compared to the Chicago developers and executives in Victoria's history. I assumed you were lying low after the situation with Thomas Hewitt, looking for an easier mark. Victoria laughed again, the sound harsh in the quiet office. An easier mark. That's rich.
No, Eleanor.
I chose James for one very specific reason. She paused, watching my face intently. I chose him because of you. The statement made no sense. Me? I never met you before the funeral. Not directly, no, Victoria agreed. But I knew all about you.
Eleanor Grace Mitchell, née Simons.
Born September 3rd, 1965, in Gary, Indiana. Daughter of Richard and Martha Simmons. The use of my maiden name, my parents' names, information not widely known in Westfield, where I had arrived as James's wife, sent a chill down my spine. How do you know that? Because, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, Richard Simmons was my father, too. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. That's impossible, I managed. My father had no other children. Just me and my brother David. No legitimate children, Victoria corrected, but plenty of indiscretions, including a brief affair with my mother in 1976. She worked as a secretary at his accounting firm. 9 months later, I was born. Vicky Simmons, named for the father who never acknowledged me, never supported me, never even admitted I existed. It couldn't be true. My father had been strict, traditional, occasionally distant, but unfaithful? A man who would abandon his own child? It contradicted everything I had believed about him, about my family. And yet, there had been rumors, whispers among the adults when I was a teenager, conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. My mother's periods of cold fury directed at my father, seemingly unprovoked. his frequent business trips that she refused to discuss. "You're lying," I said, but without conviction. Victoria shook her head slowly. "I have the birth certificate, Eleanor. And in the age of DNA testing, it wasn't hard to confirm. I found out who my father was when I was 21, tracked him down, confronted him in his office. He offered me money to disappear, to never contact him or his real family again." The description matched my father's approach to problems: practical, financial, emotionally detached. It was all too plausible. So all of this was about revenge? I asked, struggling to process the implications. "You targeted James to hurt me because of something my father did decades ago?" "Not just revenge," Victoria clarified. "Justice. Balance. You had everything. The name, the legitimacy, the inheritance, the perfect family. All because you were born on the right side of the marriage certificate. I had nothing, not even acknowledgement of my existence." The bitterness in her voice was raw, genuine in a way that her previous performances had not been. For the first time, I saw Victoria Blackwood, or Vicky Simmons, as something other than a calculating predator. I saw her as a wounded child, carrying decades of rejection and abandonment. It didn't excuse what she had done to James, to our family, to the other men she had targeted. But it explained it in a way that her simple greed or manipulative nature had not. "If what you're saying is true," I said carefully, "then we're sisters. Half-sisters, at least." Victoria's laugh was brittle.
Sisters.
What a quaint notion. "Tell me, Eleanor, where was this sisterly feeling when Richard died? When he left everything to you and your brother, without a single mention of his other daughter? Where was family loyalty when I was struggling to pay rent while you lived in your beautiful house with your perfect husband?" The gun in her hand trembled slightly, with emotion rather than uncertainty, I suspected. Whatever her original plan had been in coming here tonight, the conversation had awakened genuine pain, genuine rage. "I didn't know you existed," I said softly. "If I had, you would have what?"
Victoria challenged.
"Welcomed me with open arms? Shared your inheritance? Please. You would have done exactly what Richard did. Denied me, dismissed me, protected the precious Mitchell family reputation at all costs." She was probably right. The young woman I had been at the time of my father's death, conventional, sheltered, concerned with appearances, would likely have rejected the notion of an illegitimate half-sister making claims on the family estate. "Maybe," I conceded. "But we'll never know, because you chose a different path. You chose to insert yourself into my life in the most destructive way possible, by targeting my husband, by trying to destroy my marriage and my family's financial security." Victoria's expression hardened. "And I succeeded, didn't I?" James fell for me completely. 5 years, Eleanor. 5 years where he shared everything with me, his body, his thoughts, his dreams, his money. 5 years where he was more mine than yours. Each word was designed to wound, to emphasize the depth of James's betrayal and her triumph in orchestrating it. But something about her phrasing struck me as odd. "If your goal was to hurt me through James," I said slowly, "why continue the relationship for 5 years? Why not reveal the affair once it was established, expose him, expose your connection to me? That would have achieved your revenge much sooner." A flicker of something, discomfort, perhaps, or reluctance, crossed Victoria's face. The situation evolved. "You fell in love with him." I realized, the pieces suddenly fitting together. That wasn't part of the plan, was it? You were supposed to seduce him, use him, then discard him in a way that would cause maximum pain to me. But somewhere along the way, you actually developed feelings for him. Victoria's grip on the gun tightened. "Don't be absurd. It was always about the long game, about building a relationship that would give me leverage over both of you." But I could see the truth in her eyes, in the slight tremor of her chin. "That's why you were so devastated at the funeral, why you've been fighting so hard for recognition, for a share of his estate. Not just for the money or the revenge, but because you genuinely cared for him." "Shut up," Victoria snapped, taking a step forward. "You don't know anything about my feelings for James." "I know he cared for you," I said quietly. The texts, the emails, the photographs, they weren't just a man indulging a physical affair. He had genuine feelings for you, Victoria. Whatever your original intentions, whatever your motivations for targeting him, he saw something in you worth loving. It was perhaps the cruelest thing I could have said to her. Victoria's face contorted with a complex mix of emotions, rage, grief, perhaps even a flicker of shame. And yet, she said, her voice tight with control, when it came to the will, to his final statement about what mattered most to him, he chose you. He excluded me completely, ensured I would be left with nothing but debt and broken promises. The gun wavered in her hand, her finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, I genuinely believed she might shoot me, might complete her revenge against my father by eliminating his legitimate daughter, the one who had received everything Victoria believed she deserved. What happens now? I asked softly. You shoot me? Then what? You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. And for what? I didn't choose to be Richard's acknowledged daughter any more than you chose to be his secret one. Victoria's eyes narrowed, calculating despite her emotional state. I didn't come here to kill you, Eleanor. I came to make you an offer. An offer? I repeated skeptically. At gunpoint. Insurance, she corrected, gesturing with the weapon. To ensure you listen without interrupting, without calling the police, without your protective children intervening. I'm listening, I said, seeing no alternative. Victoria reached into her jacket pocket with her free hand, extracting a folded document which she tossed onto the desk. A settlement agreement. Simple terms. You pay me $1 million from James's estate, a fraction of what he promised me, but enough to give me a fresh start elsewhere. In exchange, I disappear. No interview with the Gazette, no lawsuit against the estate, no further contact with you or your family. I leave Westfield permanently, and the secrets, all of them, including our shared parentage, remain buried. I glanced at the document without touching it. Why would I agree to this now? We have enough evidence against you to destroy any claims you might make, to expose your criminal history, to ensure you never work in real estate again. Because exposure works both ways, Eleanor, Victoria replied coolly. Yes, you can ruin me. But in doing so, you destroy James's reputation, your children's image of their father, your own carefully constructed life as the devoted wife and widow. The scandal would follow your family for generations, the faithful wife who never suspected, the respected businessman who led a double life, the children who have to live with their father's very public disgrace. She had a point. Our counter-narrative for the Gazette would indeed damage James's memory, would confirm the affair and the financial improprieties, would subject our family to public scrutiny and private gossip for years to come. And there's more, Victoria continued, seeing my hesitation. Information about James that even you don't know yet. Things he confided in me that would change how you and your children remember him forever. More manipulation, I said dismissively. More threats without substance. Victoria's smile was knowing, confident. You found his phone, his notebook, the USB drive. But you didn't find the recordings, did you? The conversations where James talked about his regrets, his frustrations with you, his plans for the future, our future. My heart stuttered. What recordings? Insurance, she repeated. James wasn't the only one who kept evidence, Eleanor. The difference is, mine isn't locked in a safe in his office. It's secure, remote, and set to be released automatically to every news outlet in the region if anything happens to me or if the settlement isn't executed within 48 hours. It could be a bluff, but given her careful planning and other aspects of her scheme, it was entirely plausible that Victoria had maintained her own documentation of the relationship with James, documentation that might indeed contain revelations I had yet to discover. $1 million is a significant amount, I said, playing for time. I would need to consult with my children, with financial advisors.
No consultations. Victoria interrupted.
No discussions with your protective children who would talk you out of it. No careful consideration of options. The offer expires when I walk out that door. $1 million for your family's peace, for James's reputation, for an end to this entire sordid chapter. The ultimatum was classic Victoria. Immediate pressure, no time for reasoned analysis, a forced decision under duress. It was how she had operated with Robert, with Thomas, probably with James as well. And if I refuse? I asked, already knowing the answer. Then tomorrow's Gazette carries my interview, complete with selected quotes from James's more candid moments. The lawsuit proceeds, with detailed testimony about our relationship. And every personal, painful, embarrassing detail becomes public record. It was blackmail, plain and simple. But it was also, potentially, a way out, a clean break that would protect my children from further pain, preserve what remained of James's reputation, and put an end to Victoria's presence in our lives. $1 million was substantial, but not crippling. The life insurance alone was twice that amount, and James's business interests, property, and investments added significantly more. We could afford it financially, if not morally. As I weighed the decision, a movement outside the office window caught my attention, a shadow passing beneath the security light in the parking lot. Victoria, focused on me, didn't notice. "I need assurances," I said, deliberately raising my voice slightly. "Proof that you would actually honor this agreement and not come back for more later."
Victoria scoffed.
"You're hardly in a position to make demands, Eleanor. But fine. The agreement includes a non-disclosure clause with substantial penalties. Once signed, if either of us speaks about the other publicly, the penalty is twice the settlement amount." The shadow moved again, closer to the building now. Through the blinds, I could make out a figure approaching the back entrance of the store. Tall, male, familiar. Michael. He must have grown concerned when I didn't return home or answer my phone, remembered my mention of the meeting at the hardware store. I needed to keep Victoria talking, to prevent her from noticing his approach. "The recordings you mentioned, I want them destroyed. All copies, all backups." "Of course," Victoria agreed smoothly. "That's covered in paragraph 4. All materials related to James Mitchell, all evidence of our relationship, permanently deleted or surrendered to you upon payment." The back door would be locked, but Michael had a key. James had insisted each of our children have access to the business in case of emergency. The question was whether he would enter quietly or announce his presence, potentially alerting Victoria to his arrival. "And our connection?" I asked, referring to her claim of shared parentage. "That remains private as well?" Victoria's smile was cold. "Our little secret, sister dear. Though I must admit, I've enjoyed knowing something about you that you didn't know yourself. The perfect Eleanor Mitchell, not so perfect after all, the daughter of a man who couldn't keep his pants zipped, the sister of a woman he refused to acknowledge." Her words were deliberately cruel, designed to wound, to emphasize my father's failings and her perceived victimhood. But they also confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Victoria's claim of being my half-sister was genuine. The specificity of her knowledge about my father, the raw emotion behind her bitterness, the timing of her birth relative to her mother's employment at his firm, it all aligned too perfectly to be fabrication. The realization was dizzying. Not only had James betrayed me, but my father had betrayed my mother, had fathered a child he had abandoned, had created the very circumstances that would eventually lead Victoria to target my husband as revenge for his rejection. A soft click from the back of a store. The door opening. Victoria heard it too, her head turning sharply toward the sound. "Who's there?" she called. The gun still pointed at me, but her attention divided now. No response, but the faint sound of footsteps moving cautiously through the darkened store. "I told you to come alone," Victoria hissed at me, anger replacing her previous controlled demeanor. "I did," I replied honestly. "But my son is protective. When I didn't come home..." Victoria backed toward the doorway, positioning herself to see both me and the store beyond. "Michael," she called. "I know you're out there. Come in slowly, hands where I can see them, or your mother pays the price for your heroics." More footsteps, deliberate now, approaching the office. Michael appeared in the doorway, his hands raised as instructed, his expression shifting from concern to alarm as he took in the scene. Victoria with the gun, me seated behind the desk, the settlement agreement between us. "Mom," he questioned, his voice carefully neutral. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I assured him. Ms. Blackwood and I were just discussing a potential resolution to our disagreement. Michael's eyes flicked to the document on the desk, then back to Victoria. A resolution that requires a weapon? Victoria's laugh was brittle. Insurance, as I was explaining to your mother. To ensure the conversation remains private and productive. By threatening her life? Michael's voice hardened, his protective instincts clearly at war with the need to remain calm in a volatile situation. No one's life is being threatened, Victoria said smoothly, though the gun in her hand contradicted her words. I'm simply ensuring I'm heard. Now, since you're here, you might as well join the conversation. Your mother was just considering my very generous offer to end this situation once and for all. Michael looked to me for guidance, clearly struggling to assess the dynamics of the confrontation he had walked into. What offer? Before I could respond, Victoria interjected. $1 million for my permanent departure from Westfield and your lives. A bargain, considering the alternatives. Blackmail, Michael translated, his attorney's mind cutting to the legal heart of the matter just as I had done. A settlement, Victoria corrected. No different from what happens in courtrooms every day, payment in exchange for silence, for an end to litigation, for mutual non-disclosure. Michael's expression was skeptical. Except most settlements don't involve firearms or threats. Details, Victoria dismissed. The essential agreement remains the same, financial compensation for permanent resolution. As they spoke, I noticed something Michael probably hadn't yet realized. Victoria's focus had shifted almost entirely to him. The gun still pointed generally in my direction, but her attention diverted. It was the first real opportunity one had had to take action since she had appeared in the doorway. Moving slowly, careful not to draw her eye, I reached for the desk drawer where James had kept a letter opener, an antique silver piece, sharp as a dagger and nearly as long. Not a weapon I would choose under normal circumstances, but potentially effective at close range if necessary. And if we refuse? Michael was asking, keeping Victoria engaged. Then tomorrow's edition of the Gazette carries my full interview, complete with selected quotes from your father that would devastate your mother. The lawsuit proceeds, with detailed testimony about our relationship, and recordings I've maintained, conversations with James that would change how you remember him forever, find their way to news outlets across the region. Michael's expression darkened. More threats. More manipulation. Exactly what we would expect from someone with your history, Victoria. Her smile faltered slightly. My history? We know everything, Michael said, his voice gaining confidence. Your criminal record in Indiana. Your pattern of targeting wealthy men. The restraining orders. The fake pregnancy with Thomas Hewitt. All of it. Victoria's composure cracked, just for a moment, surprise and alarm flashing across her face before she regained control. Impressive research, but irrelevant to our current situation. Not irrelevant at all, Michael countered. It establishes a pattern of behavior that undermines every claim you've made about your relationship with my father. It demonstrates your history of fraud, manipulation, and extortion. It provides context for the current threats you're making against my mother. As they spoke, I continued my careful movement, fingers closing around the letter opener, drawing it silently from the drawer. Victoria remained focused on Michael, on the unexpected revelation that we had uncovered her past. You think knowing my history changes anything? Victoria challenged, anger seeping into her voice. It doesn't matter what you know or what you think you can prove. What matters is what I can reveal, what James said to me, what he planned, what he truly felt about his marriage, his family, his life in Westfield. More lies, Michael dismissed. Like everything else you've told us. Victoria's laugh was harsh. That's the beauty of recordings, Michael. They don't lie. They don't exaggerate. They capture exactly what was said, in the speaker's own voice. Would you like to hear your father explain why he stayed in his marriage? How convenience and reputation outweighed love and fulfillment. How he counted the days until he could leave Westfield and your mother behind. The words struck with precision, targeting our deepest insecurities about James's true feelings, his authentic self beneath the facade of the devoted husband and father. Even knowing Victoria's manipulative nature, It was difficult not to wonder if there might be truth in her claims, if James had indeed confided such thoughts to her during their 5 years together. But I had had enough. Enough threats, enough emotional manipulation, enough disruption of our lives and our grief. With Victoria's attention fixed on Michael, I rose from the chair, the letter opener concealed against my forearm. "There won't be any settlement," I said clearly, drawing Victoria's gaze back to me. "No payment, no agreement, no continued manipulation of my family." Victoria's expression hardened, the gun shifting to aim more directly at my chest. "Then you leave me no choice. Everything comes out, the affair, the recordings, all of it. By this time tomorrow, everyone in Westfield will know exactly who James Mitchell really was." "No," I said simply. "They won't. Because by this time tomorrow, everyone in Westfield will know exactly who you are, Victoria. Or should I say, Vicky Simmons?" I stepped around the desk, moving closer despite the weapon trained on me. "The Gazette is running our story tomorrow, complete with documentation of your criminal history, testimonials from previous victims, evidence of your pattern of targeting wealthy men for financial gain. Your real estate license will be revoked. Your credibility will be destroyed. Any claims you make about James will be viewed through the lens of your established history of manipulation and fraud." Victoria's facade cracked further, her composed expression giving way to genuine alarm. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't expose James that way." "I already have," I confirmed. "The story is set for tomorrow's edition. Bill Thompson has all the documentation, all the evidence, all the witness statements. It's done, Victoria. Over." For a moment, she seemed genuinely at a loss, her carefully constructed plan collapsing around her, her leverage evaporating in the face of our preemptive exposure of her history and methods. Then, in a flash of movement almost too quick to track, she lunged forward, grabbing my arm and pulling me against her, the gun now pressed directly to my temple. "Back up," she ordered Michael, who had started forward instinctively when she grabbed me. "Back up, or I swear to God, I'll shoot her right now." Michael froze, hands raised placatingly. "Victoria, think about what you're doing. This isn't going to end well. For anyone." "Shut up," she hissed, her breath hot against my ear. "Just shut up and listen. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to walk out of here together, Eleanor and I. We're going to get in my car, and we're going to drive to the nearest bank with a 24-hour ATM. You're going to withdraw the maximum amount available and give it to me. Then we'll discuss next steps." It was desperation talking now, not calculation. Victoria's careful planning had given way to improvisation, to a frantic attempt to salvage something from the rapidly deteriorating situation. "The banks are closed," Michael pointed out, his voice deliberately calm. "ATM limits are typically a few $100s. Hardly worth adding kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon to your record." Victoria's grip on my arm tightened painfully. "Then we'll go to your house. You must have cash there, valuables, something I can take with me." "And then what?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the cold press of metal against my skin. "You run? How far do you think you'll get, Victoria? The police are probably already on their way." "They're not," Michael said quickly, clearly concerned that the mention of police might provoke Victoria to hasty action. "I came alone. No one else knows we're here." Victoria's breathing was rapid now, her composure completely shattered. I could feel the trembling of her hand against my head, the erratic rhythm of her movements. She was panicking, improvising, dangerous in her desperation. "Here's what's going to happen," she said again, her voice strained. "We're going to walk out of here together. We're going to get in my car. And you," she dug the gun harder against my temple, "are going to call your precious children and tell them to bring cash, whatever they can gather, to a location I'll specify. If they involve the police, if they try anything heroic, I'll make sure they never see you alive again." It was a scenario that could only end in tragedy, for Victoria certainly, but potentially for me as well. In her current state, with her carefully constructed plans collapsing around her, she was unpredictable, volatile, capable of violence born of desperation rather than calculation. The letter opener was still concealed against my forearm, its weight a reminder of potential action. But with the gun pressed directly to my head, Any sudden movement would likely result in a reflexive pull of the trigger. Michael seemed to sense the dangerous precipice we were balanced on. "Victoria," he said, his voice deliberately gentle now. "Think about what you're doing.
This isn't you.
This isn't the woman my father cared for." It was a calculated appeal, targeting what might be Victoria's one genuine vulnerability, her feelings for James, the unexpected emotional attachment that had developed during what was supposed to be a purely strategic relationship. "Don't," she warned, but her voice cracked on the word. "Don't talk about James. You have no idea what was between us." "I know he cared for you," Michael continued, maintaining the same gentle tone. "I've seen the messages, the photographs. Whatever else was true or false about your relationship, that part was real. Do you think this is what he would want? You threatening his wife, his family, destroying everything he worked to build?" Victoria's breathing hitched, a sound suspiciously like a suppressed sob. "He left me with nothing. After everything we shared, everything we planned, nothing." "That's not true," I said quietly, taking a calculated risk by joining the conversation despite the gun at my head. "He left you memories. 5 years of connection that meant something to him. Don't taint that by doing something you can't take back." For a long moment, the only sound in the office was Victoria's ragged breathing. Then, slowly, the pressure of the gun against my temple lessened slightly. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered, and I couldn't tell if she was speaking to us or to herself. "It was supposed to be simple. Revenge against Richard by taking what mattered most to his precious legitimate daughter. Use James, hurt you, walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else." But it didn't stay simple, I guessed, sensing an opening in her emotional defenses. "Because you started to care for him." Another hitched breath, another sound that might have been a sob. "He was kind, genuinely kind, in a way I hadn't experienced before. Not just generous with money or gifts, but interested in me, in my thoughts, my feelings, my dreams." It was a glimpse of the Victoria that James might have seen, vulnerable, capable of genuine connection, perhaps even worthy of the affection he had clearly felt for her. It was also, potentially, our way out of this increasingly dangerous situation. "James wouldn't want this," I said softly. "He wouldn't want you to throw your life away on a desperate act that can't possibly end well for anyone." The gun lowered further, though Victoria's grip on my arm remained tight. "It's too late," she said, her voice hollow. "After tomorrow's paper, after everything you've uncovered, there's nothing left for me here. No reputation, no career, no future." "But there's still a life," Michael pointed out. "A life elsewhere, a chance to start over. Not with our money, not with blackmail or threats, but with the opportunity that comes from making better choices." It was a lifeline, thin, perhaps idealistically optimistic, but a potential way for Victoria to de-escalate the situation without losing face completely. A door left slightly ajar rather than slammed shut. For a long moment, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then, with a sound that was half sigh and half sob, Victoria lowered the gun completely. "It's over, isn't it?" she asked, releasing her grip on my arm. "Everything I planned, everything I worked for, just over." I stepped away from her quickly, moving to stand beside Michael, the letter opener still clutched in my hand though no longer necessary. "Yes," I confirmed, watching as Victoria seemed to collapse in on herself, all the fight and fury draining away to leave a woman who suddenly looked older, smaller, exhausted by the weight of her own machinations. "It's over." She nodded, a gesture of resignation rather than agreement. Then, with a movement so swift it caught us both by surprise, she raised the gun again. Not toward us this time, but toward her own head. "Victoria, no." Michael lunged forward, but it was too late. The click of the hammer falling on an empty chamber echoed in the silent office. Victoria stared at the gun in her hand with a mixture of shock and despair. "I can't even get this right," she whispered, dropping the weapon to the floor with a clatter. "Can't even end it properly." Relief flooded through me, relief that the gun had been empty or jammed, relief that we had avoided the tragedy of Victoria's suicide in James's office, relief that this chapter of our lives might finally be closing without further bloodshed. "It's better this way," I said quietly, as Michael carefully retrieved the gun from the floor. "Better to face what comes next, however difficult, than to leave behind more pain and unanswered questions." Victoria looked at me, really looked at me perhaps for the first time, not as an obstacle or a target or a symbol of everything she had been denied, but as another human being who had experienced her own forms of betrayal and loss. "Why?" she asked, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. Why was I showing compassion rather than condemnation? Why wasn't I demanding her immediate arrest? Why was I engaging with her as a person rather than the enemy she had declared herself to be? "Because we're connected," I said simply. "Not just through James, but through our father. Because whatever Richard did or didn't do, whatever choices he made that set us on opposing paths, we still share something that can't be erased or denied." Victoria's laugh was bitter, but lacked the cutting edge it had held earlier. "Sisters, after everything I've done to destroy your life, you're acknowledging me as family?" "I'm acknowledging the truth," I corrected. "What happens next is up to you. The police will be involved. There's no avoiding that after tonight. But how you approach what follows, whether you choose to continue down this path of destruction or find another way forward, that remains your decision." She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "When I started this, when I targeted James, I had this image of you as spoiled, entitled, oblivious to your own privilege. The perfect daughter who had everything handed to her while I struggled for scraps. And now?" I prompted. Victoria shrugged, a gesture of resignation rather than dismissal. "Now I see someone who's had their own struggles, their own pain. Someone who's stronger than I gave them credit for." It wasn't an apology, not even close. But it was perhaps the beginning of something else. Recognition. Acknowledgement. The first tentative step toward seeing each other as complex human beings rather than symbols or enemies. Michael had been on his phone while we spoke, his voice low as he apparently called the police. Now he returned to my side, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. "They're on their way," he confirmed. 5 minutes. Victoria nodded, accepting the inevitable. "I suppose I should thank you for stopping me," she said, glancing at the gun Michael had placed on the desk, well out of her reach. "Though part of me still thinks it would have been easier." "Easier isn't always better," I replied. "Sometimes the harder path is the one that leads to genuine resolution." As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, Victoria's posture straightened slightly, a ghost of her former composure returning. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing the question I had posed to her earlier in our confrontation. "Now," I said, "we tell the truth. All of it. About James, about our father, about the choices that led us here. And then we find a way to move forward, separately, but perhaps with a better understanding of each other." Victoria's smile was faint but genuine, the first real smile I had seen from her, uncalculated and unperformed. Always the optimist, Eleanor. Even after everything. "Not optimism," I corrected as the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the parking lot outside. "Experience. I've learned that the truth, however painful, is the only foundation solid enough to build a life on." As the police entered the store, their voices calling out, their flashlights sweeping through the darkened aisles, Victoria looked at me one last time. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "James did love you. In his way. Even during everything. He never stopped. It was a small mercy, offered in the final moments before our confrontation gave way to official statements, formal charges, the structured process of the legal system. A glimpse of the woman James might have seen beneath the calculated exterior, capable of empathy even in defeat. "Thank you," I said simply, as the officers entered the office, their presence filling the small space with a new kind of tension. What followed was a blur of questions, statements, evidence collection. Victoria was handcuffed and led away, her expression resigned but composed. Michael and I provided our accounts of what had transpired, from the fake call from Anna Hewitt to the final moments of our confrontation. It was nearly dawn by the time we were allowed to leave, exhaustion settling over me like a physical weight as we walked to Michael's car. "Are you okay?" he asked, studying my face with concern. "Really okay, I mean?" I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? After discovering my husband's affair, his betrayal, the existence of a half-sister I had never known about, and facing the business end of a gun, could anyone be truly okay? "I will be," I said finally, which seemed more honest than a simple yes or no. "It's a lot to process, but I think the worst is over now." Michael nodded, understanding that some wounds would take time to heal, some revelations would require extended reflection. "The Gazette?" he asked, referencing our counter-narrative scheduled to run that morning. "Let it run," I decided. The truth is already out there in pieces. Better to have the complete story from our perspective than fragmented speculation. As we drove home through the quiet streets of Westfield, I watched the town beginning to stir. Early risers collecting newspapers from their driveways, coffee shop lights flickering on, the first school buses making their rounds. Normal life continuing despite the drama that had unfolded overnight in James's office. That was the nature of small towns, I reflected. Moments of intense drama set against the backdrop of routine and familiarity. Secrets and revelations absorbed into the community's collective memory, becoming part of its folklore, its shared history. By noon, everyone in Westfield would know about Victoria's arrest, about the confrontation at Mitchell's Hardware, about the parallel narratives presented in the Gazette. They would discuss it over lunch counters and in beauty salons, speculate about details we had chosen to keep private, form opinions based on decades of knowing or thinking they knew the Mitchell family. But they wouldn't know everything. Some truths would remain ours alone. The complex emotions surrounding James's betrayal, the revelation of my father's infidelity and the half-sister he had denied, the moments of unexpected connection in the midst of confrontation. As we pulled into our driveway, where Sarah and David were waiting anxiously on the porch, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. Not the peace of resolution. There were still legal proceedings ahead, still emotional processing to be done, still a new normal to be established in the wake of all that had happened. But the peace of truth. Of finally seeing clearly what had been hidden for so long. Of understanding that even in the midst of betrayal and deception, there could be genuine connection, authentic feeling, moments of grace. James had loved me in his way. He had also loved Victoria in a different way. My father had loved my mother while betraying her with another woman. Victoria had targeted James for revenge, but developed real feelings for him along the way. The human heart, I was learning, was capable of contradiction, of simultaneous and seemingly incompatible emotions, of love and betrayal, of honesty and deception, of cruelty and kindness, sometimes within the same relationship, sometimes within the same moment. As I stepped out of the car to face my waiting children, to begin the process of sharing what had happened and what would come next, I carried this understanding with me like a talisman against simple judgments or easy conclusions. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. But the next chapters would be written with clear eyes and an open heart, informed by truth rather than illusion, by reality rather than the comforting fictions I had lived with for so long. And somehow, despite everything, that felt like a victory. The weeks following Victoria's arrest were a blur of police statements, legal consultations, and endless cups of coffee that never quite washed away the taste of betrayal lingering on my tongue. The story had exploded across Westfield like wildfire, with whispers following me through grocery store aisles and sympathetic nods from strangers who thought they knew the whole truth. If you've stuck with me this far in my story, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. I read every single one, and your support means the world to me during this difficult journey. The Westfield Gazette had run both stories as planned, Victoria's carefully crafted portrait of star-crossed love alongside our meticulous documentation of her history of manipulation and fraud. Bill Thompson had called it the highest-selling edition in 20 years, which seemed a hollow victory given the public airing of our family's private pain. At least the truth was out there. Not the complete truth. Some details remained private, known only to those directly involved, but enough to shift public perception from pitying poor Eleanor, the deceived wife, to something more nuanced. Something that acknowledged my strength in confronting the deception rather than just suffering from it. 3 days after Victoria's arrest, I sat in our dining room with Michael, Sarah, and David, the table still cluttered with documents and evidence we had gathered for our counter-narrative. The initial shock had worn off, leaving us in that strange emotional territory between crisis and recovery. The DA called this morning, Michael reported, setting down his coffee mug. They're charging Victoria with multiple counts: breaking and entering, aggravated assault, attempted kidnapping, illegal possession of a firearm given her prior record. Will it go to trial? Sarah asked, the circles under her eyes testament to the sleep she'd lost since that night at the hardware store. Michael shook his head. They're offering a plea deal. 3 to 5 years, depending on behavior. Given the evidence and her prior history, her attorney is advising her to take it. Good, David said firmly. The last thing we need is a drawn-out court case, keeping the story alive in the public eye. I had been quiet during this exchange, my thoughts not on Victoria's legal fate, but on the revelation that had changed everything for me, the existence of a half-sister, the product of my father's infidelity, whose bitterness and sense of exclusion had eventually led her to target my husband. Mom? Sarah's voice broke through my contemplation. What are you thinking? I looked up, meeting the concerned gazes of my children. I'm thinking about visiting Victoria, I said simply. Their reactions were immediate and predictable: protests, concerns about safety, questions about my mental state. I let them express their worries before continuing. I need to understand more about our father, I explained. About what happened, about her childhood, about the choices that set all of this in motion. Not to excuse what she did, but to complete the picture. Michael frowned. Mom, she held a gun to your head. She threatened our family. She targeted Dad deliberately to hurt you. What more do you need to understand? The why, I said softly. Not just the surface reasons: revenge, bitterness, financial gain. The deeper why. What makes a person cross lines that most of us never would? What was missing in her life that made targeting our family seem like justice rather than cruelty? My children exchanged glances, their concern evident. But they had always respected my judgment, even when they didn't fully understand my decisions. I'll go with you, Michael offered finally. The DA can arrange a supervised visit. No, I said firmly. This needs to be between Victoria and me. Sister to sister. The word hung in the air, still strange and uncomfortable. Sister. The woman who had tried to destroy my family was also my closest blood relative after my children, a paradox I was still struggling to reconcile. 2 days later, I found myself in a sterile visitation room at the county detention center, the institutional green walls and fluorescent lighting creating an atmosphere of forced neutrality. Victoria sat across from me at a small table, dressed in an orange jumpsuit that somehow failed to diminish her natural elegance. Her face was bare of makeup, her hair pulled back simply, yet she still projected a certain composed dignity. I didn't think you'd come, she said as I sat down, her voice lacking the smooth confidence I had come to associate with her. Your lawyer, maybe.
Not you.
I had questions only you can answer, I replied, studying her face for similarities to my own, to our father's. There were some: the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, subtle echoes of shared genetics. About Richard, she guessed, naming our father with a bitterness that suggested the wound remained raw despite the decades that had passed. I nodded. I want to understand what happened. The whole story, not just fragments. Victoria's laugh was soft, devoid of humor.
Why?
So you can what? Make peace with his memory? Understand the great Richard Simmons wasn't the paragon of virtue you thought he was? Because I need the truth, I said simply. After everything that's happened, James's betrayal, your deception, all of it, I need something solid to stand on, even if that something is painful. She studied me for a long moment, perhaps weighing my sincerity against her natural suspicion. What do you want to know? Everything, I said. From the beginning. Victoria sighed, then straightened in her chair, as if preparing to deliver testimony she had long rehearsed. My mother, Ellen Morris, was 23 when she started working as a secretary at your father's accounting firm. He was already successful, already married to your mother, already established. She was young, naive, flattered by the attention of an important man. It was a familiar story, one repeated countless times across generations. The powerful man, the vulnerable young woman, the imbalance that made true consent questionable even when technically present. The affair lasted about 8 months, Victoria continued. When she told him she was pregnant, he ended it immediately, offered her money for an abortion, which she refused. Then he paid her to leave town, to never contact him again, to raise me far away from his real family. The clinical way she recounted these details suggested a story told and retold over years, the emotional edges worn smooth by repetition. We struggled, she said, her voice softening slightly. Mom never finished college, had limited job prospects with a baby to care for. She told me my father was dead until I was 12, when I found the payments he sent, regular deposits, just enough to keep us afloat, just enough to buy his clean conscience. I felt a complex mix of emotions, shame for my father's behavior, sympathy for the child Victoria had been, anger at the deception that had shaped both our lives in different ways. When did you find out who he really was? I asked. When I was 19, Victoria replied. Mom got sick, cancer, and in one of our final conversations, she told me everything. My father's name, his business, his other family. You. The way she said you carried decades of resentment, of perceived injustice, the legitimate daughter who had unknowingly benefited from privileges denied to the secret child. I didn't approach him immediately, she continued. I did my research first. Learned about his business, his standing in the community, his picture-perfect family. The daughter, who had gone to college on his dime while I worked 2 jobs to pay for community college classes. The son who joined his accounting practice while I scrapped for entry-level positions that barely covered rent. Each comparison was a blade, cutting through any defense I might have offered. Because what could I say? That I hadn't known? That I would have acted differently if I had? Both might be true, but neither changed the fundamental inequity of our situations. When I finally confronted him, Victoria said, he was calm, unsurprised, almost as if he had been expecting me to appear eventually. He offered me money, not life-changing money, just enough to make me go away. When I demanded recognition, acknowledgement as his daughter, he laughed. Actually laughed. I could picture it, my father's dismissive chuckle, the one he used when he considered something beneath serious consideration. It had irritated me even as a child. I could only imagine how it must have felt to Victoria. He said his real children would never accept me, that introducing an illegitimate daughter would only cause pain to people who didn't deserve it. That his reputation, his marriage, his standing in the community were too valuable to risk for someone who was, in his words, a youthful mistake. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Whatever my father's concerns about protecting his family, to dismiss his own child as a mistake showed a callousness I had never associated with the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had patiently helped with homework, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding. I'm sorry, I said, the words inadequate but sincere. What he did, how he treated you, it was wrong. Victoria's expression flickered with surprise, perhaps at the simple acknowledgement she had been denied for decades. Yes, she agreed. It was. But targeting James, targeting my family, that was wrong too, I continued gently. I understand the pain, the sense of injustice that drove you. But we weren't responsible for Richard's choices. Weren't you? Victoria challenged, a flash of her old fire returning. You benefited from them. You lived the life that should have been shared with me. You had the father, the security, the opportunities that were my birthright too. It was a perspective I couldn't entirely dismiss, however uncomfortable. I had indeed benefited from my father's decision to maintain his public family at the expense of his secret child. My education, my comfortable upbringing, my social standing, all had been built partially on Victoria's exclusion. You're right, I conceded, surprising her again. I did benefit unknowingly, but undeniably. And that isn't fair. But James wasn't responsible for that injustice. My children weren't responsible. They were innocent in this. Victoria looked away, the first sign of possible shame I had seen from her. It wasn't supposed to go so far, she said quietly. The original plan was simpler: seduce James, gather evidence of the affair, expose it publicly to humiliate you, and tarnish Richard's legacy through his perfect daughter's scandalous marriage. Take some money in the process, yes, but mainly make you feel what I had felt. The powerlessness, the exclusion, the knowledge that you weren't enough. The calculated cruelty of the plan should have angered me, but instead, I felt a profound sadness for the wounded child who had grown into a vengeful woman, for the years she had spent nurturing bitterness instead of healing, for the damage that had rippled outward from my father's original betrayal. What changed? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Victoria's smile was faint, tinged with genuine regret. James, she said simply. He wasn't what I expected. Not just another privileged, entitled man using his power to take what he wanted. He was kind, thoughtful, genuinely interested in me as a person, not just as a body or a status symbol. It was a description of the James the First had known and loved, the man whose betrayal had been all the more painful because it seemed so out of character with his essential nature. The plan got complicated, Victoria continued. The lines blurred. I started looking forward to our time together, started imagining what it might be like if the relationship was real, not just a vehicle for revenge. Started wondering if maybe, just maybe, there could be a different ending to the story. You fell in love with him, I said, not a question but a recognition of what she had been unwilling to admit during our confrontation at the hardware store. Victoria's eyes met mine, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. I don't know if love is the right word. I'm not sure I know what that is, honestly. But I cared for him.
More than I intended to.
More than was safe for my plans. It was perhaps the most honest thing she had said to me since we had met. An admission of confusion rather than certainty, of human complexity rather than calculated performance. Did he know? I asked. About our connection? About your real motivations? She shook her head firmly. Never. That would have ruined everything. He thought I was exactly what I presented myself as, a successful real estate agent who found him attractive, who enjoyed his company, who saw something in him that maybe had been overlooked in his comfortable but predictable life. The confirmation brought both relief and renewed pain. Relief that James hadn't participated in Victoria's revenge scheme, pain at the reminder of how easily he had been drawn into a relationship founded on deception. When he died, Victoria said, her voice dropping, I wasn't prepared for how it would affect me. The grief was real, Eleanor. Complicated by guilt, by the knowledge that our entire relationship was built on lies, but real nonetheless. I nodded, understanding all too well the complexity of grieving someone whose true self had been partly hidden from us. My own mourning for James had been similarly complicated. Genuine sorrow tangled with anger, with disillusionment, with questions that would never be fully answered. What happens now? I asked, echoing the question that had been posed multiple times throughout this ordeal, but with a different meaning now. Not a tactical question about immediate next steps, but a broader inquiry about our futures, about the strange connection that existed between us despite everything. Victoria seemed to understand the distinction. I'm taking the plea deal, she said. 3 to 5 years, depending on behavior. My attorney thinks I could be out in 2 with good behavior and the right rehabilitation programs. And after that? She shrugged, a gesture that carried resignation rather than indifference. Start over somewhere new. Again. It's what I've always done. Reinvented myself, created new narratives, found fresh beginnings. Though with a criminal record, my options will be more limited this time. There was a practicality to her assessment that I found oddly admirable. No self-pity, no dramatic pronouncements about ruined lives, just a clear-eyed evaluation of her situation and possibilities. Would you? I hesitated, not sure I should voice the thought that had been forming since learning of our connection. Would you be open to contact? After you've served your time, I mean. Not immediately, not without boundaries, but some form of relationship. Victoria's expression registered genuine shock. You can't be serious. I am, I confirmed. Not forgetting what happened, not pretending it didn't matter, but moving forward with awareness of our connection. Why? She asked, the question carrying authentic confusion rather than her usual calculated challenge. After everything I did, everything I tried to do to you and your family, why would you want any relationship with me? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly in the days leading up to this visit. Because you're my sister, I said simply. Because whatever Richard did, whatever choices he made that shaped both our lives in different ways, that connection exists. And because I think we've both spent enough of our lives defined by his failings. Victoria studied me for a long moment, as if trying to detect some hidden agenda, some manipulation beneath my offer. Finding none, she shook her head slowly, not in refusal, but in bewilderment. You're a strange woman, Eleanor Mitchell, she said finally. Nothing like what I imagined all those years. Life has a way of surprising us, I replied, with a faint smile that acknowledged the understatement. Think about it. My contact information is in your allowed correspondence list. When you're ready, if you're ready, reach out. As I rose to leave, Victoria called after me, her voice carrying an uncertainty I had never heard from her before. Do you think it's possible? To move beyond everything that's happened? To find some kind of, I don't know, not forgiveness exactly, but peace. I turned back, considering the questions seriously. I don't know, I admitted, but I think it's worth trying. For both our sakes. The guards signaled that our time was up, and I left with more questions than answers, more complications than resolutions. But also with something I hadn't expected to find in that sterile visitation room, a glimmer of possibility, of connection beyond the narrative of betrayal and revenge that had defined our relationship thus far. Life in Westfield gradually settled into a new normal in the months that followed. The scandal remained a topic of whispered conversation, but as with all small-town sensations, it eventually gave way to newer dramas, fresher gossip. My children returned to their own homes and lives, though they called more frequently now, visited more often, their protective instincts heightened by all that had happened. I focused my energy on Mitchell's hardware, throwing myself into learning the business James had built and I had inherited. Dave Carson proved an invaluable teacher, patient with my questions, respectful of my decisions as I gradually took a more active role in day-to-day operations. The second location, the store associated with Victoria's entry into our lives, presented a particular challenge. Part of me wanted to sell it, to sever that physical connection to the beginning of James's betrayal. But the practical side of me recognized its value, its contribution to the overall business, its potential for growth. In the end, I decided to transform it rather than abandon it. I hired a local designer to completely remodel the space, changing everything from the layout to the color scheme to the product mix. By the time we reopened with a community celebration 6 months after Victoria's arrest, it felt like a truly new beginning, acknowledging the past without being imprisoned by it. At Sarah's suggestion, I also established the Mitchell Family Foundation, a nonprofit focused on supporting single parents and their children through educational scholarships, housing assistance, and employment training. It was our way of addressing, albeit indirectly, the inequity that had fueled Victoria's bitterness, the disparity between legitimate children with access to family resources and those excluded from such support. Do you think she'll hear about it? Sarah asked when we announced the foundation's first scholarship recipients, 5 single mothers pursuing college degrees while raising their children. Probably, I said, scanning the audience at the small ceremony we had organized at the community center. News travels even to state facilities. Do you think she'll understand what it means? Sarah pressed. That it's partly because of her? Because of what we learned. I smiled at my daughter, grateful for her insight, her willingness to see beyond the surface of Victoria's actions to the deeper wounds that had motivated them. I hope so. Either way, it's the right thing to do. The seasons changed, life continued. I developed new routines, new friendships, New interests that had nothing to do with being James's wife or the victim of Victoria's revenge scheme. I joined a book club, took up watercolor painting, even went on a few coffee dates with a retired professor who had recently moved to Westfield. Nothing serious, but enjoyable companionship that reminded me I was still capable of connection, of laughter, of simple pleasures. The first letter from Victoria arrived 14 months after her incarceration. It was brief, formal, almost awkward in its careful phrasing. Eleanor, I've been thinking about your offer of contact after my release. I'm still not sure it's wise or even possible, given our history. But I wanted to acknowledge the offer and express, not gratitude exactly, but recognition of the gesture and what it represents. I've heard about the Mitchell Family Foundation. The irony isn't lost on me. Neither is the meaning behind it.
Victoria.
It wasn't much. Not an apology, not an acceptance of my offer, not even a clear indication of her current state of mind. But it was something. A door left slightly ajar rather than firmly closed. I wrote back, keeping my response similarly brief and undemanding.
Victoria.
Thank you for writing. There's no pressure or timeline for what comes next, if anything. The door remains open, whenever and however you might choose to walk through it. The foundation is doing well, making a difference in ways I think might matter to you, given your experiences. Be well. Eleanor. Our correspondence continued sporadically over the next year, cautious exchanges about neutral topics, gradually expanding to include more personal reflections, memories of our separate childhoods, occasional mentions of James that became less painful with time and distance. Victoria never directly apologized for her actions, but her letters reflected a growing self-awareness, a willingness to examine her choices and their consequences that suggested genuine change rather than strategic performance. 2 years and 8 months after her arrest, Victoria was granted parole, her release expedited by exemplary behavior and completion of multiple rehabilitation programs. She had written to inform me of the date, not asking for anything, just sharing the information as part of our ongoing communication. I debated whether to meet her upon release, uncertain if my presence would be welcome or intrusive. In the end, I decided on a middle path, not appearing at the facility gates like an eager relative, but making myself available if she wanted contact after settling into her new circumstances. It was a month before I heard from her again, this time by phone rather than letter. "I'm in Chicago," she said after the initial awkward greetings. "Starting over. Again. How is it going?" I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral, neither prying nor disinterested. "Strange," she admitted. "Everything feels both familiar and foreign at the same time. Like returning to a childhood home that's been renovated by new owners." I understood the feeling all too well. It mirrored my own experience of rebuilding my life after James's death and the subsequent revelations. "Do you have work?" "Housing. My parole officer helped me find a position with a nonprofit that works with formerly incarcerated women," Victoria explained. "Administrative work, nothing glamorous, but it's a start. And I'm in a transitional housing program for now." "That sounds promising," I said, genuinely pleased that she had found stability so quickly. "If you need anything—" "I don't," she interrupted, her voice firm but not harsh. "That's important to me, Eleanor. Whatever relationship we might develop, it can't be based on financial support or dependency. I need to stand on my own." It was a healthy boundary, one I respected despite my instinctive desire to help. "I understand. The offer stands, but I won't push it." There was a pause, the silence stretching between us filled with unspoken complexities. Then Victoria asked, "How is Westfield? The business? Your family?" I told her about the hardware stores, about the foundation's growth, about my children's lives and my grandchildren's achievements. I mentioned my watercolor classes, the book club, even my occasional coffee dates with Professor Wilson. It was strange, sharing these ordinary details of my life with someone who had once plotted to destroy it, but also oddly comfortable, the kind of conversation sisters might have after a long separation. "You sound good," Victoria said when I finished, a note of surprise in her voice. "Happy, even." "I am," I realized, the admission catching me slightly off guard. Not in spite of everything that happened, but partly because of it. The revelations were painful, but they were also clarifying. They forced me to re-examine my life, my assumptions, my choices, in ways I might never have done otherwise. Victoria was quiet for a moment, processing this perspective. "I never considered that," she said finally. "That what I intended as destruction might actually lead to something constructive." Life rarely follows our planned narratives, I observed, thinking of all the unexpected turns my own path had taken. Which is probably for the best, all things considered. We talked for nearly an hour, the conversation gradually becoming more natural, less guarded. Before we ended the call, Victoria hesitated, then asked the question that had perhaps been on her mind throughout our exchange. "Would it be possible someday, not immediately, for me to visit Westfield? To see you in person? To perhaps meet your children, if they were open to it?" It was a significant request, one that acknowledged her desire for more than just occasional phone calls or letters. One that suggested she was serious about exploring our connection as sisters, about building something new from the ashes of our complicated past. "Yes," I said, after a moment's consideration. "Not right away, but yes. When you're ready. When we're all ready." The relief in her voice was audible. "Thank you, Eleanor." After we hung up, I sat in my living room, looking at the space that had transformed along with my life over the past 3 years. The wedding portrait that Victoria had defaced had been replaced by a gallery wall of family photos, my children, my grandchildren, even a few restored images of my parents that I could now view with clearer, more nuanced understanding. James's presence remained, in photographs and mementos, but no longer dominated the space, as it once had. I had found a way to honor what had been good in our marriage, while acknowledging its imperfections, its complications, its moments of betrayal alongside its decades of commitment. 3 months later, Victoria visited Westfield for the first time since her release. We met at a cafe on the edge of town, a neutral location where curious eyes would be less likely to recognize her or connect her to the scandal that had gradually faded from local memory. She looked different, her hair its natural color now, streaked with gray she made no attempt to hide, her clothing simple and practical rather than designed to attract attention, her face softer somehow, the sharp edges of calculation replaced by a more authentic expression. "This is strange," she admitted as we sat across from each other, coffee cups between us like small barriers. "Being back here, seeing you voluntarily, having an actual conversation instead of, well, everything that happened before." "Good strange or bad strange?" I asked, trying to lighten the moment. Her smile was tentative, but genuine. "Just strange. I'm still adjusting to a life without strategic agendas, without constant calculation. Sometimes I'm not sure who I am without all of that." "That's part of the journey, I think," I said. "Figuring out who we are beyond the roles we've played, the narratives we've constructed, the identities we've assumed." Victoria studied me with newfound respect. "When did you get so philosophical, Eleanor?" "Somewhere between burying my husband and discovering his mistress was my half-sister," I replied dryly. "Life has a way of prompting existential reflection." She laughed, a real laugh, not the practiced, performative sound I had heard during our previous encounters. "Fair point." We spent the afternoon together, walking through parts of Westfield that held no particular memories for either of us, creating a new shared experience untainted by the past. Victoria asked about the hardware stores, listened with genuine interest as I described the changes I had implemented, the growth we had achieved despite the scandal that might have destroyed the business. "You're good at it," she observed. "The business side. Better than James in some ways, I suspect." "Different," I corrected. "James built something valuable from nothing. I'm good at seeing where it can go next, how it can evolve. We would have made good partners if—" I trailed off, the unfinished thought hanging between us. If he hadn't betrayed me, if Victoria hadn't targeted him, if our lives hadn't collided in the way they had. "I'm sorry," Victoria said suddenly, the words emerging almost against her will. "Not just for James, not just for what I did to your family, but for the lost time. The relationship we might have had if Richard had made different choices." if I had made different choices. It was as close to a comprehensive apology as she had ever offered, and I accepted it for what it was, not complete absolution, not a neat resolution to all that had happened, but a step toward something new. I'm sorry too, I replied, for what our father did to you and your mother, for the inequity that shaped both our lives in different ways, for the pain that led you to see me as an enemy rather than a sister. Victoria nodded, accepting my words with the same understanding I had extended to hers, as part of an ongoing process rather than a final conclusion. Before she left Westfield that evening, we made tentative plans for her to return in a few months, potentially for a more extended visit that might include carefully managed introductions to my children, who had expressed cautious willingness to meet the woman who was, after all, their aunt by blood, if not by shared history. As I watched her drive away, I was struck by the strange trajectory that had brought us to this point, from bitter enemies to cautious connections, from calculated revenge to hesitant reconciliation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, not a complete redemption narrative or a perfect resolution. But it was something real, something honest, something that acknowledged the complexity of human relationships and the possibility of growth even after profound betrayal. 6 months later, Victoria returned to Westfield for Thanksgiving, a symbolic choice that wasn't lost on any of us. Michael, Sarah, and David had agreed to meet her, their initial reluctance gradually giving way to curiosity about this newfound relative and the stories she might share about a grandfather they had never fully known. The dinner was awkward at times, tense at others, but also punctuated by moments of surprising connection, shared mannerisms that revealed our common genetics, similar expressions or gestures that emerged unconsciously, revealing the blood tie that existed despite decades of separation. She has Grandpa's laugh, Sarah whispered to me as we cleared dishes from the table. Victoria engaged in cautious conversation with Michael across the room. It's unsettling but also, I don't know, somehow right? Like a missing piece of our family history clicking into place. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Life rarely gives us neat categories or simple narratives, I said. Sometimes the person who caused us the most pain is also the one who helps us understand ourselves more fully. Sarah studied me with the penetrating gaze she had inherited from James. You've changed, Mom. Not just since Dad died, but since everything that happened afterward. You're different now. Better or worse? I asked, curious about how my transformation appeared to those who knew me best. Stronger, Sarah replied without hesitation. More yourself, somehow. Less defined by your relationships to others and more, I don't know, self-contained? In a good way. It was perhaps the most accurate description anyone had offered of the change I had felt within myself, a shift from defining my identity primarily through my roles as wife, mother, daughter, to understanding myself as a complete person independent of those connections, however important they remained. The evening ended with tentative plans for future gatherings, careful boundaries established, but doors left open for deeper connection over time. As Victoria prepared to leave, she paused at the door, looking back at the scene she had once sought to destroy. My home, my family, my life. Thank you, she said simply, for the possibility of something different than what I imagined all those years. Thank you for being willing to imagine something new, I replied, understanding that her journey toward reconciliation required as much courage as my own, perhaps more given the narratives of bitterness and revenge she had nurtured for decades. Life continued to evolve in the years that followed. Mitchell's Hardware expanded to a third location, this one managed primarily by David, who had discovered an unexpected aptitude for the family business. The foundation grew, its impact spreading beyond Westfield to neighboring communities. My relationship with Professor Wilson, Howard, deepened into something meaningful, a companionship that respected my past while creating space for new experiences. Victoria remained in Chicago, building her own life independent of our connection, yet increasingly comfortable with the role of distant but engaged family member. She visited several times a year, gradually developing relationships with my children that, while never as close as biological connections established from birth, offered everyone involved a broader understanding of family and its complexities. 5 years after Victoria's release, I received a package from her, a small, carefully wrapped box containing a velvet case. Inside was the diamond pendant James had given her, the one she had worn to his funeral with such calculated provocation. A note accompanied it. Eleanor, this belongs with your family, not with me. Not as restitution. Nothing could fully address the harm I caused, but as acknowledgement that some symbols should be restored to their rightful place. I've been thinking a lot about inheritance lately, not just material possessions, but the legacies we receive from those who came before us, and those we pass on to those who follow. Richard gave us both complicated inheritances, material security paired with illusions about his character. Me, hardship paired with a bitterness that nearly destroyed my capacity for genuine connection. What matters, I'm learning, is not what we receive but what we choose to carry forward and what we choose to set down. With gratitude for the second chance neither of us expected.
Victoria.
I held the pendant in my palm, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic. Then I made a decision, one that felt right in ways I couldn't fully articulate. I called Victoria. I received the pendant, I said when she answered. Thank you for returning it. It seemed right, she replied simply. I'd like to do something with it, I continued. Something that acknowledges everything that's happened while creating something new. Would you be open to that? What are you thinking? She asked, curiosity evident in her voice. I explained my idea, to have the diamond reset into 2 identical pendants, smaller but matched, one for each of us. Not to erase the history it represented, but to transform it into a symbol of the unexpected connection that had emerged from that painful past. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. You continue to surprise me, Eleanor, she said finally, in ways I never could have imagined when this all began. Is that a yes? I pressed gently. Yes, she agreed. It feels appropriately ironic, given where we started. A fitting recognition of how life rarely follows the stories we tell ourselves. When the pendants were completed, I sent Victoria hers with a simple note. From endings come beginnings. From pain, possibility. From the past, a future neither of us could have imagined. I wore mine to Howard's retirement party the following week, the small diamond catching a light as I moved through the crowded reception. Several people commented on it, admiring its delicate setting without knowing its complicated history. It's beautiful, Howard said as we danced later that evening, his hand warm against my back. New. In a way, I replied, thinking of all the transformations the stone had undergone, from James's gift to me, to his gift to Victoria, to its return and recreation as something shared between sisters once divided by betrayal and revenge. It represents a journey. The best things usually do, he observed, pulling me closer as the music slowed. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in the home that had witnessed so much drama, so much pain, and ultimately so much healing, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Gray hair I no longer colored, lines that mapped decades of laughter and tears, eyes that had seen more than I could have imagined when I married James all those years ago. The pendant gleamed at my throat, a reminder not just of what had been lost, but of what had been found in the aftermath. Strength I hadn't known I possessed, family connections I hadn't known existed, capacity for forgiveness I hadn't known I could access. The betrayals remained real, James's infidelity, Victoria's calculated revenge, my father's abandonment of his second daughter. The pain they had caused couldn't be erased or dismissed. But alongside those truths existed others. The possibility of growth after devastation, of connection after estrangement, of new beginnings after endings that had seemed final. As I turned away from the mirror and slipped into bed, I thought about the story I had lived, the unexpected twists, the dramatic confrontations, the revelations that had changed everything I thought I knew about my life and family. It wasn't a story I would have chosen if given the option. It contained chapters of betrayal and deception that still ached when examined too closely. But it was mine, and I had claimed it fully, rewritten its conclusion not through denial or revenge, but through the harder, braver work of truth-telling and reconciliation. Through the radical act of seeing beyond binary narratives of heroes and villains to the complicated, flawed, ultimately human reality that existed beneath such simplifications. The phone on my nightstand buzzed with an incoming text. Victoria, wearing the pendant to a foundation event tomorrow. Strange how symbols can be transformed by intention. I smiled, typing back, life too. Her response came quickly. Indeed.
Good night, sister. Sister.
The word no longer carried the shock it once had, the dissonance between our shared blood and divided histories. It had become, like the pendant, a symbol transformed, not erasing the past but incorporating it into something new, something unexpected, something genuine despite its complicated origins. I set the phone aside and turned out the light, settling into the darkness with a sense of peace that had been hard-won but was no less valuable for the difficulty of its acquisition. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own complications, its own opportunities for growth or regression. But tonight, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be, the author of my own story, the architect of my own healing, the widow who had discovered that vengeance belonged not to me or to Victoria, but to the truth itself, which had ultimately set us both free. 3 months later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday, addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. No return address, just my name and home address written in a careful, precise script that suggested deliberation rather than casual correspondence. I opened it at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me as morning sunlight streamed through the windows. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery, folded precisely, containing just a few lines. Eleanor, I hope this finds you well. I've been following your story from a distance, the business expansion, the foundation, the renewed relationship with your sister. It seems you've found your way forward with remarkable grace. I always knew you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for, including perhaps yourself. With admiration,
Thomas.
Thomas. No last name, no further identification. But a chill ran through me as I remembered Victoria's revelation about her relationship with a man named Thomas Hewitt, about the fake pregnancy she had claimed, about the photograph showing them together that she had planted in my home. The photograph that had been dated April 1996. The photograph that had shown Victoria's stomach with the slight curve of early pregnancy. The pregnancy, she had later admitted, was faked, the positive test bought online, the sonogram belonging to her cousin, the manipulation designed to gain leverage over a wealthy target. But what if that hadn't been entirely true? What if there had been a real pregnancy at some point, resulting in a child Victoria had never mentioned? A child who would now be an adult, approaching 30, perhaps seeking answers about his or her origins. A child who might have recently discovered connections to Westfield, to the Mitchell family, to the scandal that had made headlines a few years earlier? I stared at the signature, Thomas, and wondered if this was the final chapter of Victoria's story, yet to be revealed, or perhaps the first chapter of an entirely new narrative about to unfold. With steady hands, I picked up my phone and dialed Victoria's number, the letter still open before me, its few lines suggesting possibilities both intriguing and unsettling. Sometimes endings are really beginnings in disguise. And sometimes, just when you think the story has reached its conclusion, you turn the page to discover it's only the intermission.